Sierra May Lamar was born on October 19, 1996, in Fremont, California. She was Marlene's second child, and she already had a daughter, Danielle, who was 6 years older than Sierra. Sierra was known for her fun-loving and cheerful nature. Her teachers often described her as the class clown, always making others laugh without causing any trouble. Friends and family recall her as a confident young girl who had a knack for instilling that same confidence in those around her. From a young age, she enjoyed physical activities like dancing, and during her teenage years, she became involved in her school's cheerleading team. She also had a love for animated movies and often went to the cinema with her father, sharing this passion together. Sierra's parents divorced when she was still a child, and shortly afterward, Marlene began dating someone new. A couple of years later, Sierra moved to Morgan Hill, a city in the San Francisco Bay Area, with her mother and her mother's new partner. Meanwhile, her father remained in Fremont, and her older sister was attending college in Sacramento. Like many girls her age, Sierra was reluctant to leave behind her friends and the life she had always known. She also had reservations about her mother living with someone she wasn't married to. Despite these family challenges, Sierra's outgoing personality and positive energy helped her fit in easily at her new high school. She quickly became part of the cheerleading team and made many new friends while still keeping in touch with her old friends in Fremont, visiting them often since they were only an hour's drive away. Although she wasn't entirely happy with the move or her mother's new relationship, Sierra, then 15, maintained a good relationship with Marlene, often speaking frankly with her. She also had a close bond with her older sister, calling her several times a week to talk about school, friends, and the boys she liked. Just as Sierra was beginning to settle into her new life, an unexpected event shattered her dreams and future plans, plunging her family into a nightmare with no apparent end in sight. March 16, 2012, started like any other day. Sierra woke up, got ready for school, took a selfie, and uploaded it to her online diary, where she posted pictures almost daily. She then said goodbye to her mother, as was her routine every morning, giving her a hug and telling her she loved her before heading to the nearby bus stop. Later in the day, Marlene sent a few text messages to Sierra, reminding her of the chores she needed to do after school. When Sierra didn't respond, Marlene assumed her daughter was simply busy with schoolwork. After finishing work at 3:45 p.m., Marlene called Sierra to make sure everything was okay, but there was no answer. It wasn't until 6 p.m. when the school's automated attendance reporting system sent an email to Marlene that she realized Sierra had never made it to school. Alarmed, Marlene called 911 to report her daughter as missing. Unfortunately, crucial hours had been lost between Sierra's disappearance and the notification to the authorities. Upon receiving the report, the police first checked the school bus surveillance footage and discovered that Sierra never boarded the bus. This led them to conclude that something had happened between her house and the bus stop. Security footage from previous days provided no clues, so the search began in the area. Initially, the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office treated Sierra's case as a standard missing person report, as there was no evidence suggesting foul play. However, over the next few days, evidence began to emerge that indicated otherwise. On March 17th, Sierra's cell phone was found near a road intersection in Morgan Hill, about 2 miles from her home, seemingly tossed from a vehicle. The following day, a pink Juicy Couture bag belonging to Sierra was discovered 2 intersections away, abandoned by the roadside. The bag contained neatly folded clothes, including a pair of jeans and a shirt, along with all of Sierra's documents and the $5 she had been given for lunch. Everything appeared untouched. In the days following Sierra's disappearance, a massive volunteer search was organized. The area around Sierra's home and the bus stop where she was last seen was rugged and challenging, with fields, hills, reservoirs, forests, ravines, and dense brush. The search focused on finding any evidence that might indicate a crime. Both authorities and volunteers worked tirelessly day after day, determined to find clues that could lead to Sierra. During the daily search efforts, approximately 150 items were discovered that could potentially be considered clues. One of these items was a box labeled handcuffs and used condoms, found by a volunteer about a mile from Sierra's bus stop. However, it was unclear if this discovery was related to Sierra's disappearance, as the area was known to be a popular hangout spot for teenagers who would often gather there to drink and engage in other activities. On March 20th, Sierra was officially classified as a missing person under the category of abduction, meaning someone had taken her against her will, which elevated the importance of the case. A forensic examination of Sierra's phone and personal computer revealed nothing useful, but investigators insisted on accounting for the whereabouts of all registered sex offenders in the area at the time of Sierra's disappearance. Surprisingly, among those on the list was Sierra's own father. Back in 2009, Steve had faced at least 10 counts of child molestation that occurred 5 years earlier. He pleaded guilty to one charge involving the sexual abuse of 3 of Sierra's friends, aged 8 to 9, during a sleepover at his home, and he served a year in jail. This was the real reason why Sierra had moved in with her mother, as her father was legally prohibited from living alone with a minor. However, Sierra's father was quickly ruled out as a suspect. Investigators found nothing in Sierra's family life to suggest she might have run away voluntarily. The disappearance of Sierra deeply affected the community, and she soon became known as everyone's daughter. While the police investigation progressed, volunteers continued their search efforts. On March 28th, DNA found on Sierra's jeans was matched to a man named Antolin Garcia Torres, 21 years old. Antolin worked at a local supermarket and lived in a trailer park about 8 miles from Sierra's home with his pregnant girlfriend, their 18-month-old baby, and his mother. During the investigation into Antolin, authorities uncovered that on 3 separate occasions, women had reported to the police that someone had tried to abduct them from parking lots at the supermarket where Antolin worked. One of the alleged victims claimed she had tried to defend herself with a pocket knife, but the attacker disarmed her and held the blade to her throat. Each of these women reported that the kidnapping attempts were thwarted by their screams or the presence of nearby people, though none of them had identified Antolin as the perpetrator. During one of the attacks, Antolin dropped a stun gun, which, upon analysis, was found to have his fingerprint on the battery. Antolin also had a criminal record that included felony assault and a charge of sexual relations with a minor in 2010. After this discovery, the police placed him under 24-hour surveillance. They also reviewed security footage from the trailer park where he lived and saw his red Volkswagen Jetta leaving the area just 15 minutes before Sierra left her home to go to the bus stop. The same vehicle was captured on surveillance footage in the area where Sierra was last seen on March 16th. The police brought Antolin in for questioning, but he claimed that after leaving his home on the day of Sierra's disappearance, he went fishing alone. With no witnesses or additional evidence to corroborate his story, the police asked him directly how his DNA could have been found on Sierra's belongings. Antolin's explanation was that he often pleasured himself in his car and used tissues to clean up afterward. He speculated that he might have thrown one of these tissues out the window, which could have ended up in Sierra's bag. However, The police had not disclosed the type of sample from which the DNA was extracted, so Antolin had incriminated himself by assuming it was related to something sexual. Naturally, the investigators did not believe his excuse. Several witnesses reported seeing a car matching the description of Antolin's near the bus stop at the time Sierra was believed to have disappeared. As a result, on April 7th, authorities obtained a search warrant for Antolin's vehicle. During the search, they found one of Sierra's hairs entangled in a rope in the trunk, along with her fingerprints on the rear door handle. In parallel, the police began using cadaver dogs as they continued searching for Sierra, hoping to find any evidence that could assist in the investigation. Following the discoveries in his vehicle and 2 months of surveillance, on May 21, 2012, the police arrested Antolin for the abduction and suspected murder of Sierra Lamar. The case gained national attention and was even featured on an episode of America's Most Wanted. To commemorate 1 year since Sierra's disappearance, the community of Morgan Hill organized a tribute on March 16, 2013. They released helium balloons in Sierra's favorite colors, each tied with a ribbon and notes containing messages of hope and love. Nearly a year later, on February 11, 2014, Antolin was formally charged. He pleaded not guilty. On Saturday, March 14, 2015, 3 years after Sierra's disappearance, her family made the incredibly difficult decision to officially end the search. For years, volunteers had conducted weekly searches, hoping to recover Sierra's body or remains. This effort became the longest ongoing search of its kind in the United States at the time. Although it was reported in September 2015 that the trial was set to begin on April 25 the following year, it faced multiple delays and didn't actually start until January 30, 2017. From the outset of the trial, the prosecutor warned the jury that the defense might argue Sierra had voluntarily run away from home. Without a body, murder weapon, or key witness, the prosecution's case relied heavily on forensic evidence, DNA samples, and circumstantial evidence. He told the jury that the evidence suggested Sierra had been bound, dragged, and placed in the trunk of Antolin's car. He also pointed out that a police officer noted a strong odor of urine on Sierra's jeans, which were found less than 4 miles from her bus stop. The discovery of the clothing, including underwear, indicated that the young girl's lifeless body was likely naked. The fact that the clothing was dirty with soil supported the theory that she had been dragged. The prosecutor also mentioned to the jury that during initial questioning, Antolin had voluntarily provided information about his sexual habits, even though no authorities had mentioned the specific type of DNA evidence found on Sierra's belongings. Sierra's mother, Marlene, took the stand to testify, speaking about her relationship with her daughter and recalling how, on the morning of March 16th, as they did every day, they had exchanged a kiss and an "I love you" before parting. She also confirmed that the clothing and other items found on the road belonged to Sierra. Next, Antolin's ex-girlfriend, who, by the time of the trial, had officially separated from the accused, testified for about 90 minutes. She claimed she could hardly remember any details about the morning when Sierra disappeared. During cross-examination, it was revealed that she had given inconsistent accounts regarding Antolin's whereabouts and other details over the years. She also admitted to fabricating part of her grand jury testimony, specifically about Antolin's particular method of folding and half-rolling his pants, a detail that was significant because it directly related to how Sierra's pants were found in her backpack along with the rest of her clothing. However, she told the jury that she had no way of knowing how Antolin folded his pants because he never did the laundry or put away clothes. Another key piece of evidence presented by the prosecution was a purchase Antolin allegedly made sometime before Sierra's disappearance. According to supermarket membership card records, Antolin had bought a turkey baster, a tool used for injecting sauce into meat or removing excess fat, as well as a jug of bleach. These items could be used to eliminate DNA evidence following a sexual assault. Unfortunately, the authorities were unable to recover any of these items from the accused's car or residence. The prosecutor questioned Antolin's ex about this, and she stated that she knew nothing about it. However, she noted that Antolin rarely went grocery shopping alone, especially not at midnight, the time when the purchase was recorded. She mentioned that if he had done so, her ex-partner would have mentioned buying household items. She also noted that shortly after Sierra's disappearance, Antolin and she, along with two friends, had gone to Fresno for a snowboarding trip, during which Antolin consumed cannabis. The turkey baster could have been used as a tool to make concentrated cannabis, as Antolin's lawyers later argued. The defense listed the main reasons why they believed Antolin was innocent. They pointed out that Sierra's body had never been found and questioned why her hair, found in their client's car, wasn't shown in an initial photograph but appeared later. The defense team even suggested to the jury that the driver of a brown car seen in the area where Sierra disappeared in March 2012 might be the real culprit. Although the defense was prohibited from mentioning to the jury the prior child molestation conviction that Sierra's father had served, the court documents presented by Antolin's lawyer argued that Sierra had run away because she lived in a broken home and was struggling in school. According to the defense, Sierra had moved to Morgan Hill less than a year before her disappearance and was unhappy. They also claimed that Sierra had confided in a friend about her plan to run away and had even shown her a suitcase packed with clothes. Some of Sierra's friends from Fremont testified before the jury, confirming her displeasure with the move to Morgan Hill but also expressing doubt that she would have run away voluntarily. Her friend Shannon told the court that on the day of her disappearance, Sierra had texted her saying she was excited to visit her hometown and pop some pills, referring to the narcotic known as ecstasy. The defense team argued that Sierra had been in contact with people involved in criminal activities and might have run away or been abducted by drug traffickers. However, Sierra's friends rejected this suggestion and agreed with the prosecution that her behavior and drug use were just typical teenage things. To counter the defense's claims of a possible connection between the accused and the teenager being mere coincidence, the prosecutor questioned Jeanette Kinner, a woman familiar with Antolin's social circles. Jeanette confirmed that she knew of at least one teenager who had attended school with Sierra but didn't realize the connection until after Sierra's disappearance. The defense also challenged the prosecution's assertions regarding Antolin's alleged attempts to kidnap 3 women from the parking lots of 2 supermarkets in separate incidents that took place in 2009, 3 years before Sierra went missing. The defense's primary argument was that none of the women had been able to identify Antolin in a lineup of suspects. Antolin's older sister then took the stand. She described to the jury how she and her brother had spent much of their childhood alone. She revealed that their father was in prison at the time of the trial, that he was an alcoholic who frequently beat their mother in front of them, and that he had sexually abused her from the age of 5 until she was 15. Regarding the DNA evidence presented by the prosecution, the defense told the jury that proper protocol had not been followed with the samples, and that the bag containing Sierra's clothes had been contaminated, thus compromising the genetic profile analysis. However, the prosecution emphasized that the evidence had been carefully collected and preserved. Antolin did not testify. On May 9, 2017, more than 5 years after Sierra's disappearance and following a 13-week trial, the jury deliberated for about a day and a half before notifying the judge that they had reached a unanimous verdict. Antolin Garcia Torres, then 26 years old, was found guilty of the kidnapping and murder of Sierra Lamar. He was also convicted on 3 counts of attempted kidnapping during the commission of a carjacking in relation to the 3 incidents from 2009. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Additionally, he was required to register as a sex offender after the prosecution argued that sexual gratification was one of Antolin's primary motives for kidnapping and killing Sierra. In November 2017, Antolin's defense attorney attempted to secure a new trial, arguing that the presiding judge should have recused herself due to potential bias. However, the petition was denied by a San Francisco judge. In December 2020, Antolin refused to provide any information about Sierra Lamar's whereabouts in response to a handwritten letter sent by a journalist. Of the 4 questions posed to him, he only responded to the one regarding his innocence, reiterating that he was not guilty of Sierra's disappearance and alleged murder. The Lamar family has never held a funeral for Sierra, believing that without a body to bury, the ceremony would be meaningless. In 2022, on the 10th anniversary of her disappearance, some of the volunteers and Sierra's family gathered privately to remember the teenager. Despite the difficult circumstances and the deep desire to recover her remains for closure, Sierra's family has chosen to remember her fondly and cherish the happy times they spent together. In a small American town called Bristol, Tennessee, Johnia Berry was born on August 26, 1983. She was a happy and friendly person who had many friends and loved to have fun at parties. When she was in school, she was also part of the local cheerleading team. After finishing high school, Johnia went to East Tennessee State University to study psychology and criminology. During her college years, she met Jason White, and they became a couple, eventually getting engaged right before they graduated. In late 2004, when she was 21 years old, Johnia decided to get a master's degree in psychology. This led her to move temporarily to Knoxville, another city, for her studies. While studying, she worked part-time at a children's educational center and discovered her passion for helping children. Her boyfriend, Jason, continued his studies in a different state, working towards a law degree. Even though they were far apart, they stayed in touch and planned their wedding. In Knoxville, Johnia initially stayed in her friend Jason Amami's apartment. They both went to college together and later moved to Knoxville. They shared an apartment with 2 bedrooms, and Jason let Johnia stay there until she found her own place. Johnia had 2 part-time jobs, one at a jewelry store and the other at a children's hospital. On the Sunday night of December 5th, after finishing work at the store, Johnia went to the mall to do some Christmas shopping. When she got back home, she wrapped presents for the children at the educational center, talked to her neighbor, and then went to her room. She also spoke to her boyfriend on the phone before going to bed. Around 4 in the morning, Jason Amami heard a scream from a woman. He thought Johnia was having a bad dream, so he went to her room. But instead, he found a stranger with a knife. The stranger attacked Jason, and they had a fight. Eventually, Jason managed to push the attacker away and ran out of the apartment. He went to the nearest convenience store, which was almost a kilometer away, to call for help. When the store clerk saw Jason, who was covered in blood, they called 911. Jason explained what had happened to the police when they arrived. The police went to their apartment and found Johnia in the hallway that connected 5 apartments. She was still alive but barely conscious. When they asked her about the attacker, she could only give weak clues. The police searched the whole building and the area nearby, but they couldn't find the attacker. They rushed Johnia to the nearest hospital, but the doctors couldn't save her, even though they tried their best. The doctor said she had more than 20 stab wounds, and it was very unlikely she could survive. As for Jason, he had 8 wounds from the attacker, but only one was very serious. He got medical help, and his life was not in danger. Meanwhile, the detectives started to investigate the crime scene. They found blood in the hallway, showing that Johnia had tried to ask her neighbors for help, but no one had opened their doors. Right next to Johnia's room, they found the murder weapon, which turned out to be a kitchen knife that belonged to Jason. The attacker had used it with such force that it got bent and damaged. The police also found blood near the back door of the apartment and on the stairs leading to the street. Since Jason and Johnia had left through the front door, the detectives thought the most likely explanation was that the killer had escaped through the back door. In Jason's room, they discovered another clue, a partial footprint, which the attacker might have left when he followed Jason and attacked him. Because of the brutal way the attacker had taken Johnia's life, the police suspected that the motive behind the crime was personal. At first, the detectives started looking into Johnia's boyfriend, even though he was far away, about 1,000 kilometers from Knoxville. But all his friends and family said that Johnia and her boyfriend had a wonderful relationship, and he had no reason to commit such a cruel crime. He found out about Johnia's death when her mother called him at 10 in the morning. He said that after hearing the news, he fainted and took a long time to recover. He was in no condition to do anything, so he had to ask his neighbor to help him book a plane ticket and pack his suitcase. The investigators carefully checked his alibi and realized that he couldn't have physically traveled to Knoxville and back by morning. So, they ruled him out as a suspect and turned their attention to Johnia's neighbor instead. In contrast to the victim's boyfriend, this neighbor had no solid alibi and had been inside the apartment with her, raising suspicions that he might be the culprit. Friends and family of Johnia were also skeptical of him. Some believed he could be the likely killer, while others accused him of fleeing the apartment, leaving Johnia behind. This suspicion ran so deep that the victim's parents didn't even want him to attend her funeral. Shortly after Jason was released from the hospital, investigators began questioning him. He stuck to his initial account. He heard screams, saw an unfamiliar man, and was attacked. After managing to fend off the attacker, Jason rushed to the front door and out into the street, seeking help from the neighbors. He believed that Johnia had also managed to escape the apartment because he couldn't hear her screams. However, the police had reservations about accepting this version of events. What initially raised doubts about Jason were his injuries. 7 of the 8 wounds were superficial, and the last one on his right arm could have been acquired either while defending himself or during an attack. Additionally, investigators found no signs of forced entry into the apartment, suggesting that the person responsible might have been inside already. Jason claimed that he had taken out the trash through the back door that night, but couldn't remember if he had locked it or not. Detectives continued to press him, paying close attention to which door he used to exit the apartment onto the street. Jason insisted that he had left through the front door, but the police suspected he might be lying. If Jason had indeed exited through the back door, it would explain the presence of bloodstains near the door leading to the stairs, further raising suspicions against him. Moreover, the police accused him of using and selling illegal drugs and of being aggressive when he couldn't get his fix. The young man denied all these allegations, but investigators continued to level various charges against him. After several hours at the police station, the detectives proposed a polygraph test of him. Surprisingly, Jason agreed. The investigators brought in an expert who asked him leading questions, and at the end of the session, they informed him that he had failed the test indicating that he was providing false answers. Upon hearing this, Jason became emotionally distraught, shouting that he had nothing to do with the crime, that his life was in danger, and that the real criminal was still on the loose. However, the detectives remained unconvinced. Nevertheless, they couldn't charge him with the murder due to the lack of concrete evidence. They had to wait for laboratory experts to complete their examination of the few pieces of evidence found in the apartment, and an unexpected twist soon emerged. During their analysis of the murder weapon, the knife, they discovered 3 DNA samples, those of the deceased girl, Jason, and an unidentified man. Additionally, the unknown man's DNA was found in Johnia's room, on the back door handle, and on the staircase used by the criminal to exit onto the street. Furthermore, they uncovered a fingerprint on the knife handle, marked by the victim's blood, that did not match Jason's fingerprint. These discoveries led the police to doubt that Jason was the murderer. The evidence strongly indicated that another person had been in the apartment that night. However, when they checked the DNA sample against existing databases, they found no matches. Even though investigators had ruled out Jason as a suspect, public opinion continued to cast doubt on him, accusing him of leaving his girlfriend behind and fleeing instead of protecting her. Furthermore, Jason started experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder. A significant development soon came to light. It was revealed that the polygraph operator had misinterpreted the test results, and there was no indication that Jason was lying. Additionally, there was no concrete evidence linking the young man to illegal substances. It had been used as leverage, but more importantly, the severity of Jason's injuries had been initially underestimated. In reality, Jason had suffered serious damage to his lung and neck, with little hope for a full recovery. Due to these inaccuracies in police reports, the insurance company only covered 25% of his treatment costs, leaving Jason facing severe financial hardship. Once the police no longer considered him a suspect, they began questioning Jason as a witness. From his account, they managed to create a rough description of the attacker. The situation was complicated by the fact that Jason hadn't gotten a clear look at the assailant's face. The apartment was dimly lit, and the attacker had pounced on him as soon as he exited the room. The investigators also stumbled upon something intriguing in Johnia's room: a cap, along with discs, and a stereo player near the back staircase. Initially, they thought these items might belong to either the victim or Jason, but Jason denied any connection to them. According to him, none of these items were in his apartment, suggesting they were left behind by the killer. The investigators shared a rough sketch of the suspect with the media, and after it was publicized, the police received hundreds of leads. People reported individuals who vaguely resembled the sketch, prompting detectives to pursue each of these leads. One lead stood out to the investigators. They learned about a group of teenagers in the area who had been breaking into houses with the intent to steal. One of these teenagers, a 19-year-old named Michael, bore a resemblance to the suspect's sketch. The police initiated a search for him, which was complicated because he was already wanted for theft. Now, with the possibility of his involvement in a murder, 2 police units joined the search for Michael. They eventually located him and brought him in for questioning. The investigators immediately focused on Michael's shoes, which had a tread pattern similar to the footprint left by the killer. They collected a DNA sample and fingerprints from Michael and sent them to the experts for analysis. Meanwhile, they interrogated him, and during this process, they received an unexpected revelation. Michael quickly admitted that he and a friend had indeed entered Johnia's apartment that night. According to his account, they had planned to steal valuable items, but his friend had taken a knife and attacked Johnia. However, the detectives soon began to doubt Michael's story. Firstly, the details he provided didn't align with the actual events. Secondly, there was no evidence of the presence of 2 strangers at the crime scene. The laboratory results further confirmed their skepticism. Michael's DNA and fingerprints did not match those found at the murder scene. The same held true for his shoes. The tread pattern did not match the one in Jason's room. Ultimately, the police concluded that Michael had fabricated the story. While it may sound unusual, such false admissions occur relatively frequently in high-profile cases. Some individuals falsely claim guilt for various reasons, including seeking attention or hoping for a reward for information. It remains unclear what motivated Michael, but his story turned out to be entirely untrue. Following that, investigators interviewed over 1,000 potential suspects and gathered around 400 DNA samples, but none of them matched the evidence. Early in the investigation, a reward had been offered for information leading to the case's resolution. As each month passed, the reward amount increased, and by December 2005, 1 year after the murder, it had reached $60,000. Adding to this, the state governor chipped in an additional $20,000 from his own funds, drawing even more public attention to the case. Despite the abundance of leads, all of them eventually led to dead ends, and the case remained unsolved for several years. In 2007, the victims' parents decided to take action by seeking changes in state legislation. They found it perplexing that the fingerprints and DNA of the murderer were not in any databases. Given the brutality of the crime, the parents refused to believe it was the perpetrator's first offense. They later discovered that, according to Tennessee laws, fingerprints and DNA samples were only collected from convicted criminals. Johnia's parents were determined to change this. They played an active role in crafting a new law that mandated the collection of these samples from all individuals arrested for violent crimes. Authorities supported this initiative, and the law was enacted in May 2007. 2 months later, a breakthrough occurred in the case. The police arrested Taylor Lee Olson, a 22-year-old, for violating the terms of his probation. Olson had a long history of criminal activities, primarily involving theft, check forgery, and auto theft, and he had been arrested multiple times before. Surprisingly, his fingerprints and DNA had never been collected, even though he had a history of run-ins with the law. Olson lived with his girlfriend and their newborn daughter, but his criminal activities persisted. It was revealed that Olson had already come to the investigators' attention 5 months earlier when they received a tip about his possible involvement in the murder. However, for reasons unknown, the police had not pursued DNA samples for analysis at that time. Nevertheless, with his new arrest for probation violation, they finally decided to question him about Johnia's case. Olson eventually confessed his involvement in the murder and willingly provided a DNA sample. When the lab results came in, it was confirmed that Taylor's DNA was a complete match with the sample found in the victim's apartment. Following this, they collected his fingerprints, which also matched the fingerprint on the murder weapon. Olson was subsequently arrested, and detectives began to question him. Initially, Olson said he was not guilty, but he eventually decided to confess to his actions. Taylor claimed that on that night, he had intended to steal Johnia's car and had entered her apartment through the back door to find the car keys. When he entered her room, she woke up and began screaming. In response, Olson grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed her multiple times. However, he insisted that he hadn't intended to kill anyone, and it had all occurred accidentally. Detectives had doubts about the truthfulness of some details and leaned towards believing that Taylor had premeditated the murder. It was possible that he had been stalking the victim for some time, indirectly supported by the fact that Johnia's friends had reported someone following her in a car. At the time, no evidence was found to substantiate this, but after Olson's arrest, it seemed increasingly plausible. Despite this, there was little doubt about his culpability. His DNA and fingerprints were present on the murder weapon, strongly indicating his involvement. Olson's trial was slated to commence in mid-2008, and by that point, he had already retained a lawyer. Apparently, his legal counsel advised him to retract his confession, and Taylor presented a new version of events to the detectives. Now, he claimed that he had entered Johnia's apartment with his friend named Noah Cox. According to this revised account, when Olson entered Johnia's room to retrieve the car keys, she allegedly woke up, seized a knife, and stabbed him several times. Olson then fled through the back door, while his friend entered Johnia's room, disarmed her, and killed her. This new narrative raised suspicions among the police. They found no fingerprints or DNA from other individuals at the crime scene, making it appear unlikely that anyone else was involved. Detectives awaited the start of the trial, but it never occurred. On March 28, 2008, Taylor Olson took his own life in his prison cell. Alongside him, several suicide notes were discovered, addressed to his family, Johnia's relatives, and the police. In the note to the detectives, he once again alleged that his friend Noah Cox was the actual perpetrator and also apologized to Johnia's family and his own. Detectives continued to believe that Olson was responsible for the murder and repeatedly questioned Noah. However, they found no evidence implicating him. Johnia's parents also remained skeptical, believing that Olson was lying. In their view, if Taylor was truly innocent, he wouldn't have taken his own life. It seemed more likely that he simply did not want to spend the rest of his life in prison. Furthermore, for several months following his initial confession, Olson had consistently maintained that he had entered the apartment alone and that there was no one else with him. The sudden change in his story to shift blame onto his friend raised further doubts. Sidney Loofe was born on August 21, 1993, in a small Nebraska town called Broken Bow. In 2000, her family moved to the city of Nilaya in search of other opportunities. From a young age, Sidney was known to be very good at fishing, which she loved. She also played volleyball and other sports at school, but unfortunately had to give them up due to developing scoliosis during her adolescence, a condition that affects the spine and causes an abnormal curvature to the sides, greatly increasing the risk of injuries during physical exertion. After finishing her high school studies in 2011, Sidney got a job at a hardware store and was able to move into a small apartment 3 hours away from her parents' home. According to her family, Sidney suffered from anxiety and had been struggling with severe depression. They were aware of this because, just a few days before her disappearance, Sidney had opened up about it, leading her parents to help her get an appointment with a doctor and even taking her to the consultation to be prescribed antidepressants in hopes of improving her situation. Unfortunately, that day would be the last time her parents saw her alive. As the investigation progressed in search of useful information, the police contacted friends and acquaintances of the missing young woman for clues about her possible whereabouts. Thanks to a friend of Sidney, they learned that the girl had met a young woman named Audrey on the Tinder app, who had agreed to a date on November 14, 2017. For that date, Sidney had asked if it would just be the two of them, to which Audrey affirmatively replied. The date between the two women was to take place in the basement of an apartment that Audrey had rented. Strangely, it seemed to go well, as that night Sidney returned to her apartment, and they planned another date for the next day. There were several pieces of evidence for this, as Sidney had even posted a photo on her Snapchat on November 15 with the caption, "Ready for my date," along with a heart emoji. Until that moment, this was the only information the police had about Sidney. She had taken the precaution of informing her friends that she was going out with an unknown person from Tinder whom she had been talking to for some time. Among these friends was a girl named Brooklyn McChrystal, who, upon learning of Sydney's disappearance, set out to gather information about the person her friend had gone out with to hand over to the police. For this, she decided to create a Tinder account and began searching through profiles in the area until she finally found one of a girl, also named Audrey, like the person who had gone out with Sydney. Brooklyn proceeded to like this profile and thus managed to make a match with this supposed Audrey, and they both started messaging until Brooklyn finally got Audrey to share her phone number. Once she had the number, Sydney's friend gave all the information to the police so they could start tracking the number and thus find the location of the suspect. This plan seemed unlikely to work, as many things could go wrong, but 2 days later, the authorities made a terrifying discovery. It turns out that when tracking Sydney's last phone movements before it lost signal, it was found in the same location as the phone number given by Sydney's friend. This left the officers no choice but to head to that location, leading them to the city of Wilbur, also in Nebraska, to a duplex apartment. On one side lived the owner, and on the other, a couple of tenants who immediately caught the officers' attention. The person renting the apartment was a 51-year-old man named Aubrey Trail, and his name was suspiciously similar to Audrey from Tinder, and the girl in these photos could perfectly be this man's girlfriend, a 23-year-old girl named Bailey Boswell. Despite all this, the police did not consider this couple as direct suspects, and for them, the possibility that Sydney was still alive was very high. For this reason, the visit they made to Aubrey and Bailey was routine and to leave no stone unturned. Upon arriving at the apartment and after knocking on the door several times, no one came out to greet them, so the officers asked the owner of the complex for help, who handed over the key, and they were able to confirm that there was no one at home. The only thing that caught the police's attention was that a penetrating smell of chlorine was coming out of this apartment, impregnating the entire place. The owner even told them that he had noticed this a day ago, and that because of that intense smell, family member of the owner had vomited and developed a rash due to the potent chemical. He also mentioned that strangely, he had noticed that Aubrey Trail and his girlfriend had the air conditioning still running despite it being November and temperatures being very low in Nebraska at that time of the year. The next day, the police returned to the apartment, but this time they were more prepared and armed with a search warrant to enter and inspect the entire place thoroughly. However, they found nothing. Everything seemed the same as the day before. The couple was still without any signs of having returned home, and the same chlorine smell continued to emanate from the basement. But there was nothing else that caught their attention at first glance, so they left the place and focused on continuing to search for the missing young woman in the surroundings of the city. 2 weeks later, and still with no news of Sydney, her disappearance became more popular in the media, and in the absence of new evidence indicating another path to follow in the case, the police issued a public statement classifying Aubrey Trail and his girlfriend as persons of interest and possible suspects. In response to this statement, the man and his partner made a live broadcast on Facebook, defending themselves against the police accusations and claiming they were both innocent. At the end of the broadcast, it can even be heard Aubrey saying, "I pray for Sydney to appear soon." 2 days later, the police arrested Trail and Bailey in a hotel in Missouri. Although this was for charges not related to Sydney's case, it turns out that the two earned their living by scamming antique stores and private businesses. Defrauding people they also scammed. At the time of their arrest, according to police statements, the couple possessed maps, sleeping bags, and sports shoes, which appeared to be part of their tools for their plan to escape to Mexico. After this arrest for fraud, the police found an excuse to interrogate the two suspects about Sydney's case. At first, they did not say much, but Bailey confessed to being the owner of the Tinder profile identified as Audrey and confirmed that she had met with the girl on both occasions. According to her, The last time she saw Sydney was on November 15, after taking a ride in her own car while smoking marijuana, and then they left Sydney at a friend's house. After that, they did not exchange a single message. When the police asked where the friend's house was located, the young woman said she did not remember the exact location. She responded with monosyllables and refused to give any personal information about herself. Aubrey Trail also refused to make any statements during his arrest for fraud and the subsequent interrogation. After this, the FBI decided to get involved in the investigation of Sydney's disappearance. Bailey Boswell never had a father figure, as her father was absent when she was just a girl. Bailey was good at sports, so much so that in high school, she was the first on the list of the fastest runners, and for this she was even once offered a scholarship to play basketball at the university. But all this promising future was ruined when she started having problems with substance abuse after graduation. Shortly after, she had a daughter and married a man named Freddie Pennell. Those who knew the dynamics of this couple describe it with terror, as this man was very aggressive, both physically and psychologically with Bailey, and he had such an extreme drug addiction that, combined with his violent attitude, social service authorities were forced to take their daughter from their home when she was still in her early school years. According to Bailey's mother, at one point, this man even hit and kicked her in the face while she was still pregnant. On the other hand, although it was hard to believe, Aubrey Trail had an even more complicated life than his partner. As a child, his parents were abusive to him in all possible ways, and Aubrey said he felt as if their greatest wish was for him to disappear. These mistreatments continued until his grandfather took over his upbringing. Sometime later, while still very young, Aubrey was forced to return to his childhood home, where he would again suffer abuse from his stepfather. Growing up in poverty, he had to move through various foster homes until, as a teenager, he ended up in prison after being convicted of armed robbery. On his release, he began looking for different ways to make a living, avoiding traditional employment. Scams became a part of Aubrey's daily life. He primarily defrauded antique shops by selling them fake objects purported to be ancient, and he also got involved in thefts whenever the opportunity arose, among other illegal activities. This was Aubrey's lifestyle, when one day while browsing a website, which was a classifieds page where implicitly many people sold their bodies, he contacted Bailey Boswell. Aubrey was on this page looking to connect with a female, and Bailey was supposedly there looking for a sugar daddy. This is how these two, with a 28-year age difference between them, began their relationship and moved in together to the apartment Aubrey had rented in the city of Wilbur. As the FBI gathered all this information about the suspects' past, while they remained under arrest for their fraud schemes, and during the interrogation process, neither was willing to provide additional information about the possible whereabouts of Sydney. They maintained their innocence regarding any crime related to her, but this would change when a very chilling discovery was made. On December 4, 2017, a search team from the local police department, led by the FBI, found parts of Sydney's body discarded in trash bags on a dirt road north of Nebraska, approximately an hour's drive from the city of Wilbur, where the two suspects lived. Along with Sydney's body, adult toys and artifacts were found, discarded using the same bags in which the young woman's body was wrapped. It was confirmed that the date of death was almost a month prior, and although they could not be precisely sure, forensic studies estimated that her death occurred around the dates Bailey organized the dates with the girl. They also stated that the body had bruises all over. Upon the discovery of Sydney's body and the emergence of this evidence, both suspects began to talk, or at least Aubrey did, as Bailey seemed to be in shock during all subsequent interrogations and cried while declaring her innocence of the crime, although she was not willing to implicate Aubrey or declare that he had planned the crime. On the other hand, Trail would give various versions and statements that would vary both in the interrogations conducted after the body was found and throughout the judicial process he would face in the coming months. This was further proof to finally classify him psychologically as a pathological liar, that is, a person who lies compulsively. Initially, after being placed in pretrial detention due to evidence suggesting he might try to escape to Mexico, Aubrey confessed that he had killed Sidney on his own and without Bailey's help. In the same statement, the man requested that the law of retaliation be applied. Indeed, he exclaimed that he should be executed for the murder of Sidney Loofe. However, as warrior-like and archaic as this sounded, Aubrey did not stick to his statement and later said that Sidney died after a third date they had, where the three of them were engaged in a threesome. Each one, consensually of course, was fulfilling their fantasies until it came to a point where, again consensually, Sidney's neck had to be tightened a bit. At that moment, Aubrey went too far and the young woman ended up dying from asphyxiation. At some point in this whole snowball of lies created by Aubrey, he began to tell the FBI agents something that wasn't entirely a lie because there was evidence that he did something similar, but not exactly as he told it. This was that he practically dedicated himself to uploading videos on the dark web, and these videos were of him, Bailey, and another girl. In this case, it was believed that Sidney participated in this, as he made them believe, and that these videos were quite perverse, in which clients with strange fetishes paid him to perform all these bizarre acts. Aubrey also said that he used the money he received from these videos to pay different young women to participate and help him make them. He claimed they were aware that there were practices or fetishes that could result in injuries or even death. He even went so far as to say that Sidney had consented to participate as part of the deal and that he had a video of her consenting to this. But obviously, as this was most likely a lie, such a video could never be seen by any of the authorities to be taken as verifiable evidence. Although Aubrey lied a lot in his statements and often contradicted himself, the authorities had to be attentive to anything that came out of his mouth since he occasionally told the truth, at least partially. For example, in one of his statements, he gave them a clue as to where they could find Sidney's phone, which was in the cemetery of Wilbur. When they went there, the police indeed found the girl's phone, along with her driver's license and credit cards. In 2018, the trial that would decide the fate of the two accused began. On June 11 of that year, the court announced that both Aubrey Trail and his girlfriend Bailey Boswell would face charges of first-degree murder and improper disposal of human remains. The prosecution expressed its plan to seek the death penalty for both due to the gruesomeness of the crime, and because at the final moment of the trial, both defendants decided to plead not guilty. This was likely because their lawyers had a very distorted view of reality and sold their clients the idea that they could go free. During the trial, 3 women who had been involved with the couple testified. Thanks to this, very interesting details were revealed, such as that Aubrey had told them he was a kind of vampire who could read minds and obtained his powers by performing perverted rituals, while also claiming that he could gain more of these powers if he ever managed to kill a woman as part of these rites. One of these women also testified that when she stopped participating in meetings with the couple, Aubrey threatened her, saying he would kill her entire family if she revealed the atrocities that were taking place there. The defendant's lies fell apart when the prosecution's evidence conclusively demonstrated that this crime had indeed been premeditated and planned in advance. Some housekeepers from a nearby motel testified that they had seen Sidney with Bailey and Aubrey at the hotel weeks before the young woman's disappearance. Security cameras from another hotel near Sidney's workplace showed Bailey and Aubrey lurking around the area. On November 15 at around 11 a.m., the couple was seen buying a folding saw and food grinders at a local mall. The prosecution also presented phone tower records indicating that both had been waiting near Sydney's residence in the hours before she went to work on November 15. Apparently, they followed her to her workplace, where another security camera recorded Aubrey entering the hardware store in the afternoon, minutes before Sydney's shift ended, frequently glancing over his shoulder as if monitoring her. There were also security recordings showing Trail purchasing a large saw for wood, large-sized trash bags, and several lighters of bleach at a store. Although many searches were conducted, the saws that Trail supposedly used were never found. They also couldn't find traces of Sydney's DNA on the adult toys that were analyzed and found at the scene where her body was located. This is presumed to be due to the thorough cleaning with bleach that the man had carried out in the entire apartment. However, the FBI found traces of blood and Sydney's DNA on a pair of rubber gloves and on a pair of pants belonging to Aubrey. The same was found on an electrical cord that appeared to be the final cause of death for the 24-year-old woman. Following this, there was not much to be done. Aubrey's defense attorneys had attempted to portray the crime as a perverted threesome gone wrong, but with all the compelling evidence against this idea, it was abandoned. Bailey's defense, on the other hand, had a bit more success. They focused on her troubled adolescence and argued that her role in Sydney's death had been almost forced after being emotionally manipulated by Aubrey, who was twice her age. When the time came for the trial that would determine the final fate of the 52-year-old man, the jury decided that Aubrey Trail would be sentenced to death. This was for charges of first-degree murder and many more, such as conspiracy. Trail's defense attempted to appeal the verdict, but the judge denied this request. Meanwhile, Bailey's defense asked for her final sentence to be postponed for later. In October 2020, a jury sentenced her to life imprisonment for the same charges imposed on Aubrey. Bailey was not given the death penalty because the court considered the circumstances of her young age and the emotional manipulation by Trail in committing these acts. Today, Bailey is incarcerated in a women's correctional center in Nebraska, and Aubrey is on death row, awaiting the fulfillment of his sentence in the coming years. At some point during the trial, specifically when the prosecution began seeking the death penalty for Bailey, Aubrey became very upset because he wanted all the blame to fall on him and not on his partner. At that moment, he caused a scandal in the courtroom. After saying that Bailey did not understand and cursing everyone in the court, he suddenly pulled out a razor blade. It's unclear where he got it from, as he was in court, and attempted to harm himself in an area where he obviously intended to do the most damage. However, he did not die from this act, dispelling any notion that he was a vampire or had any special powers. The Whitaker family was a family like no other. The father, named Kent, owned a business in the construction area, which he had also inherited from his parents. It was a well-established business of several generations, doing very well economically. Patricia, the mother, was a school teacher, but decided to retire from work when she had her first child and dedicated herself to taking care of her son. Their first son, the eldest, was named Bart, and a couple of years later, they had another boy, Kevin. These two children were quite privileged. As their friends saw them, they were given everything they wanted, attended the best schools, and their house always seemed to be the place where everyone wanted to gather because they always had the latest toys and the latest movies. Their mother, Patricia, was always there taking care of them. And having been a school teacher, she had a lot of empathy with children, so the kids felt very happy at home. As money was never a problem for them, they focused more on their children doing what made them happy. What fulfilled them, Bart, The eldest son shared his passion for cycling with his father from a very young age, which meant they spent a lot of time together, always fixing their bikes and going on rides. The relationship between the two brothers was also quite good, quite close, although everyone described them as polar opposites. The older brother, Bart, was more extroverted, more of a joker, somewhat more rebellious. Kevin, on the other hand, was much calmer. Everyone said he seemed more attached, more thoughtful, sensitive, and generally more considerate. This difference, instead of separating them, seemed to bring them closer together, complementing each other. Since both were quite popular with their respective groups of friends, there didn't appear to be any competition between them. Life for them seemed almost perfect. Their parents never fought, at least not in front of them. They had no major problems. Both children were well educated, well fed, and didn't suffer any violence or abuse at home. Their neighbors said they were the kind of family you set as an example for your own, the kind of family you aspire to have one day. In 2003, Bart, the eldest son of the Whitaker family, was 23, and his younger brother, Kevin, was 19. Both were university students. On December 10th, Bart excitedly called his parents. He had aced his final exams and was graduating with honors. Overjoyed, the family decided to dine out for a special dinner. They gathered at their home first, where Bart received a coveted Rolex watch as a graduation gift. The family then piled into the father's SUV and headed to Bart's favorite restaurant. The evening was filled with joy, captured in photographs taken by Bart's father, but the cheerful atmosphere was short-lived. Upon returning home, Kevin, the youngest, was the first to step out of the SUV and head towards the house. Just as he reached the stairs inside, he was shockingly shot in the chest. Patricia, standing in the doorway, was also shot in the chest. Kent, following behind, was hit in the arm, causing him to fall outside the house. Meanwhile, Bart, who had returned to the SUV for his cell phone, heard the gunshots. He hurried into the house and encountered an assailant in a balaclava, whom he believed to be African American, fleeing through the kitchen's back door. In the ensuing chaos, Bart was shot in the arm, but managed to avoid more serious injury. The attacker escaped. Bart, now in the living room, frantically dialed emergency services, not realizing a neighbor had already called them. By the time of Bart's call, the entire family had been attacked. As police and ambulances were dispatched, a concerned neighbor, hearing the gunshots, rushed over. He found Kent outside, gravely injured but conscious, and quickly fashioned a tourniquet from his shirt. Approaching Patricia, all she could utter was, "He shot us," before succumbing to her injuries and being unable to speak further. The neighbors stayed by their side until help arrived. Tragically, young Kevin was pronounced dead at the scene, a heartbreaking end to what began as a night of celebration. In the wake of the tragic shooting, Patricia, gravely injured, was airlifted to the hospital. Sadly, her injuries were too severe, and she passed away before they could reach the hospital. Meanwhile, Kevin and Bart, the eldest son, both wounded in the arm, were rushed to the hospital by ambulance. Thankfully, they were conscious and alert, their conditions not life-threatening. The crime scene was a hive of police activity as investigators tried piecing together the events of that fateful night. Initially, it looked like a robbery gone horribly wrong. A lone glove lay outside, a haunting clue, and inside, a gun, the instrument of the night's horror, was found on the kitchen floor, close to where Bart had been shot. The story took an unexpected turn the following day. Reporter, delving deeper into Bart's claimed university graduation, made a startling discovery. Bart was not enrolled at the university and was far from graduating. This revelation once passed to the police, added a complex layer to the investigation. In the hospital, detectives confronted Kent with the news of Bart's academic deception. Surprisingly, Kent's reaction was one of calm acceptance rather than shock or grief, despite the tragedy that had struck his family. The police then turned to Bart, seeking an explanation for his lies. Overwhelmed by academic pressure and fearful of disappointing his high-expectation parents, Bart confessed to fabricating his educational success. Amidst this turmoil, the community gathered to mourn Patricia and Kevin's passing. The funeral service, attended by over 1,000 people, reflected the family's standing in the community. Friends of Kevin shared heartfelt tributes, painting a picture of a generous and beloved individual. Bart, too, was a focal point of these tributes, often hailed as a role model by his younger brother. As the investigation progressed, the initial theory of a burglary unraveled. Despite the presence of cash and valuables in the house, nothing was missing, steering the investigation towards more personal motives behind the tragic incident. The detectives, piecing together the chilling events at the Whitaker home, noticed something odd about the master bedroom. The drawers were all slightly open. It was as if someone had peeked inside, but didn't rummage through. Curiously, nothing seemed missing, and there were no signs of forced entry. It was as if the attacker knew exactly when the family would return, a suspicion further fueled by the precise nature of the shooting. 4 shots were fired in the dark house, each hitting a different family member, with 4 shell casings found at the scene. It seemed the assailant either knew the layout of the house well or was an exceptionally skilled shooter. The gun used in the shooting, found on the kitchen floor, bore no fingerprints, just a partial palm print, not enough to identify anyone. When they traced the gun's registration, it was linked to Kevin, the younger son who was already deceased. He had kept the gun in a safe in his room, which had been forcefully opened. Intriguingly, the master bedroom, where valuable items were stored, was left untouched. Instead, the focus was on Kevin's room, where the safe was cracked open to retrieve the gun. This indicated that the assailant was searching for something specific and knew exactly where to find it. The only item missing from the house was Bart's cell phone, which he had dropped during the chase and the assailant had picked up. The investigation took a turn when a friend from Bart's past reached out to the police. This friend revealed a shocking plot. 2 years earlier, in 2001, Bart had solicited him to murder his family in exchange for payment. The plan detailed by the friend mirrored the actual events that unfolded. Although the friend, Adam, had an alibi for the night of the murders, the police were intrigued by the striking similarities between the planned and executed crimes. Adding to the complexity, Jennifer, another friend of Bart's, had overheard him and his roommate discussing a similar plot. Alarmed, she confronted Bart, who ambiguously brushed off her concerns. Despite Jennifer's subsequent report to the police and their conversation with Bart's parents, the matter was not pursued further, partly due to the parents' trust in their son. Following their discharge from the hospital, Bart and his father, Kent, returned to live in their house. Despite the police's concerns for Kent's safety, he remained steadfast in his belief in Bart's innocence. Noting Bart's exemplary behavior and newfound religious devotion since leaving the hospital, the mystery deepened around Bart's involvement in the crime. Detectives couldn't shake off their suspicions, especially recalling his previous attempt to plot a similar crime with his friend Adam. They started digging into Bart's current circle, zeroing in on 2 names: Chris, his roommate, and Steven, a neighbor. Both young men were known for their carefree lifestyles, lacking stable jobs and clear future plans. When the police questioned them, both Chris and Steven staunchly denied any involvement in the crime. In an unconventional move, the detectives asked for DNA and scent samples from the duo. They used a sterilized gauze soaked in distilled water to capture their scents. These samples were then lined up alongside others, including the suspected ones. A scent detection dog was employed, first introduced to the scent of the gun, drawers, and glove from the crime scene, and then to the lineup of scent samples. Remarkably, in all three tests, the dog matched the scent on the crime scene items to Chris's scent. However, this type of evidence wasn't enough to hold up in court, and detectives knew they needed more to build a solid case. As they delved deeper, detectives found that the robbery scene didn't add up, and Bart's lie about attending university only cast more doubt on him. They even tapped the phone lines of Chris and Steven, hoping to catch something incriminating. Bart, for his part, seemed cooperative during police interrogations and even participated in a reenactment at the crime scene, but his accounts were vague and unconvincing. In a twist, the police got Adam, the friend who had revealed Bart's 2001 murder plan, to call and blackmail Bart. In that call, Bart neither confirmed nor denied his involvement, but agreed to pay Adam $20,000 to keep silent. Later, Adam received $250 in cash from Bart, and the police found Bart's fingerprints on the envelope, further linking him to the crime. 7 months after the murders, in July 2004, Bart told his father, Kent, he was going out with friends. The next morning, with Bart nowhere to be found, a worried Kent contacted the police. They discovered Bart's truck abandoned outside some apartments, far from his home, with the engine still running. This strange occurrence, coupled with the fact that Bart had stolen $7,000 from Kent, started to turn Kent's belief in his son's innocence. The police, not letting up, increased pressure on Chris and Steven. They conducted extensive interviews with their families and acquaintances, keeping the investigation active. Their persistence paid off a year later. Unable to live with the guilt, Steven came clean to the police, confirming their suspicions. He confessed that Bart had orchestrated the murder of his family, motivated by the prospect of inheriting everything if his younger brother was also eliminated. Bart had promised a share of the inheritance to both Chris and Steven, though he never specified an amount. Steven revealed that while he didn't enter the house and only acted as the getaway driver, Chris was the one who went inside and executed the shootings. Steven also admitted that he was initially reluctant, but was coerced into the plan. The final piece of evidence surfaced when the police, 18 months after the crime, discovered a backpack thrown into a lake by Steven and Chris. Inside the backpack were items linking them to the murders: a chisel with blue paint matching the forced open safe, bullets identical to those used in the crime, a matching glove to the one found at the crime scene, a partially empty water bottle of Chris's DNA, and 2 cell phones registered in Bart's name, used for communication during the crime. After the shocking confession from Steven, the police quickly arrested Chris and Steven. But the saga took another twist 8 days later, on September 15, 2005. A Mexican man named Rudy Rios, lured by a $10,000 police reward, made a call that would crack the case wide open. Rios confessed he had sold his identity to Bart for $3,000 and had even helped him escape to a small town on the Mexican border. There, Bart, funded by the stolen money from his father, blended into the local life. He rented a room, became a regular at the local church, made new friends, and even found a girlfriend. Her family, owning a furniture business, unsuspectingly welcomed him, believing his fabricated tale of being an injured military deserter from Afghanistan. Rios, eyeing the reward money, gave the police detailed information on Bart's location, leading to his arrest by Mexican authorities for illegal residence. He was then handed over to the U.S. police to face trial for the grim events of December 10th. On that fateful night, Bart orchestrated a dinner outing under the pretense of celebrating his false university graduation. He needed his family to leave and return home together, setting the stage for the planned attack. At the house, Bart casually took photos with his family, even making an obscene gesture in one, a haunting detail given the impending doom he knew was coming. Bart maintained a calm face at the restaurant, later describing himself as feeling numb. Meanwhile, Chris, waiting in Bart's truck, accidentally dropped a glove, a critical piece of evidence later found by the police. Using the key and alarm code given by Bart, Chris entered the house, avoiding any signs of forced entry. He retrieved the gun from Kevin's safe and lay in wait. As the family left the restaurant, Stephen, stationed outside, gave Chris the signal. Stephen discreetly followed the family home, parking a block away to await the aftermath. Chris, following the plan, shot the 3 family members inside the house and then Bart in the arm to disguise him as another victim. Bart's subsequent call to emergency services included a misleading description of the attacker, further complicating the initial investigation. After the horrendous act, the two drove to a lake, their mission to dispose of a bag containing the damning evidence of their crime. Back at their homes, Chris and Stephen waited anxiously for Bart's call, expecting to discuss their payment for the grim deed. Yet the call never came, and Bart failed to deliver any form of compensation for their involvement. March 2007 marked the beginning of Bart's trial, where a series of startling admissions came to light. Bart confessed to plotting the murder of his family, not once but 3 times. His first attempt dated back to December 2000 with a couple of friends. Their plan failed when an attempted break-in triggered the house alarm, sending them fleeing. A few months later, Bart designed another plan with his friend Adam, which never materialized beyond mere talk, thanks to their friend Jennifer overhearing and reporting them. The third attempt, tragically successful, was executed with Chris and Stephen. Even after his parents uncovered the second plot, Bart, driven by a big desire to see his family dead, did not deter from his fatal intentions. During the trial, friends involved in the earlier, unsuccessful plans were granted immunity in exchange for their testimony against Bart. Despite Bart's claims of guilt and remorse, Stephen's testimony painted a different picture, revealing Bart's cold request to finish the job by killing his father in the hospital. Bart's duplicity extended even to his girlfriend's family in Mexico. He spun a web of lies, claiming he was an only child, unloved, with a mother who was a prostitute. Living under a false identity, he felt emboldened to fabricate this false narrative. In a disturbing revelation, his girlfriend testified that Bart, in a twisted attempt to comfort her during a family dispute, suggested they could kill her parents, a suggestion she thankfully did not take seriously. The trial, lasting a mere 7 days, concluded with the jury needing only 2 hours to declare Bart guilty. With the death penalty looming over him in Texas, Bart took the stand in his defense, pleading for his life and arguing against the capital punishment. The prosecution grilled Bart on the potential danger he posed to society. His defense: he claimed to have harbored hatred only towards his family. After 10 hours of deliberation, the jury sentenced him to death. Bart's case was peculiar. There was no history of abuse from his parents. They were loving, supportive, and provided him with every opportunity, including luxury cars and a house for university. Despite receiving everything materially, Bart testified he felt unloved and blamed his family for the person he had become, seeking revenge for a life he resented. Bart's journey through the justice system was a tumultuous one, marked by repeated attempts by his lawyers to overturn his death sentence. Yet, each appeal hit a dead end, as the courts consistently denied them. Throughout this ordeal, Kent, Bart's father, remained a steadfast pillar of support. Despite the gravity of his son's crimes, Kent publicly forgave Bart, professing belief in his son's remorse and vowing to stand by him until the very end. As the years in prison passed, the inevitable drew closer for Bart. 11 years after his sentencing, his execution was scheduled for February 22, 2018. With the clock ticking down, Kent ramped up his efforts to save his son. He appeared on television programs and passionately pleaded with the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles, hoping for a miracle. In a dramatic turn of events just 2 days before the execution, the board, moved by Kent's unwavering advocacy, unanimously recommended clemency for Bart. However, the final word was in the hands of the Texas governor. On the day destined for Bart's execution, as the grim procedures commenced, a glimmer of hope emerged. Bart had his last meal and precious moments with his father, perhaps for the last time. But fate had a twist in store. 45 minutes before the execution, the governor granted Bart clemency, sparing his life on the condition that he would never challenge his new sentence: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Meanwhile, Chris, the triggerman in the tragic saga, received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 30 years behind bars. Steve, the getaway driver who aided the prosecution, faced a relatively lighter sentence of 15 years due to his cooperation, and has since been released from prison. On the morning of December 2, 1991, in Ecatepec, Mexico, a mariachi returning from his nightly work was walking home, as usual. On his way, he encountered a young boy wandering the street alone. The child was dirty, as if covered in mud, and the mariachi wondered why a child in such a state was alone on the street. He recognized the boy as the youngest son of the Chavez Lopez family, known for having one of the biggest and most spectacular houses in the Jardines de Morelos neighborhood. The mariachi's first question to the boy was why he was dirty and where his mother was. The boy, 3 years old, could walk and talk, but not clearly, making it difficult to understand him. The child seemed calm, likely not understanding what had actually happened, and told the mariachi that a doctor had operated his mother at home, and then she didn't wake up again. This sounded strange to the mariachi, who realized that the boy was not covered in mud, but in blood. What had really happened was beyond the boy's limited understanding of the world, and he couldn't explain what he had witnessed. Confused, the mariachi decided to take the boy to his own home, where his wife was waiting. She knew more about the Chavez Lopez family, and knew the boy's name was Alejandro. Shocked by Alejandro's appearance, she and her husband decided to go to Alejandro's house to find out why his parents had left him in such a state. Upon arriving, they noted that the house looked strange. The front door and a patio door were open, suggesting someone was inside, but the curtains were drawn and the lights were off, giving the impression that the family wasn't home or was sleeping. The couple debated entering, but felt uneasy about the vibe of the house. They decided to seek help from another neighbor who lived across from the Chavez Lopez family. By then, the situation had become a scandal among the neighbors, all of whom were wondering what was happening. Yet, none dared to enter the house until the officials arrived. In the meantime, they could only help by cleaning the boy, noticing he had a recent wound under his armpit that had stopped bleeding. Given the dried, darkened blood on the boy, initially mistaken for mud, it was inferred that whatever had happened occurred several hours earlier. Shortly after, a police patrol arrived, and the testimony of the two officers about what they saw inside conveyed the terror they felt each time they thought about it. Upon entering the house, They immediately sensed a heavy atmosphere. The main living area was dark, and no one was visible, so they decided to go upstairs where the bedrooms were located. Hearing the sound of a television in the distance, they headed towards the room it was coming from. They found the door to the room was jammed, not by the lock, but because something was blocking it from the inside. With some effort, they managed to open the door and were horrified to discover the bodies of a man and a woman blocking it. Both were on the floor, one on top of the other, in a blood-soaked room. The officers, unaccustomed to such gruesome scenes and without bullets in their guns, were left speechless and hastily exited the house, visibly shaken. They stood for a few seconds, leaning against their patrol car, and one of the officers called for backup, feeling overwhelmed by the situation. About 20 minutes later, several police patrols arrived, and the officers, equipped with flashlights, began to examine the house. They knew about the two bodies in the upstairs room, but first wanted to check the ground floor for a better understanding of what had happened. To their surprise, the rest of the house appeared orderly, contrary to their expectations of a burglary gone wrong in a high-class family's home. There were no signs of a break-in or a thief searching for valuables. Not finding any abnormalities on the ground floor, and under orders not to disturb the scene before the forensic experts arrived, the officers first examined the room with the TV and the lifeless bodies. The victims were quickly identified as Alejandro and Phoebe Chavez Lopez, the homeowners. The crime scene was indescribable. The knife, the apparent weapon, was used multiple times on the victims, resulting in blood covering the floor, walls, and bed. A shoe print on the bed and the disarray in the room suggested that the Chavez Lopez couple had fought for their lives. Surprisingly, in the room was a bag containing credit cards, checkbooks, and jewelry, indicating that robbery was not the motive. It seemed the crime was driven by hatred towards this specific family, raising the question of who could have done this to such hard-working people, both of whom were school teachers. Everyone spoke highly of the Chavez Lopez family. Alejandro, the father, was an entrepreneurial man. Though a teacher by profession, his passion was business. He was well known in the impoverished neighborhood for his large house, which stood out. He understood the importance of networking for business success, often attending meetings and parties where he made connections with influential people, helping him rise to the top of the community. 33, he already owned 2 large schools, which provided him with a good income, and he had no intention of stopping. Besides teaching, Alejandro's other passion was cars. With his experience in restoring automobiles, he aspired to establish a garage and had already acquired the land for it. Unfortunately, Alejandro could never realize this dream. His wife, Phoebe, was known for her beauty and assisted Alejandro in the administrative aspects of his businesses. She had a daughter, Lorena, from a previous relationship. Lorena, 13 years old and distinct in appearance from her siblings, was treated as Alejandro's own daughter, even taking his surname. The other children, Jasmine, 10 years old, Erica, 8 years old, and Alejandro Jr., 3 years old, were from Phoebe and Alejandro's marriage. Despite the Chavez Lopez house's spectacular exterior, it was poorly designed with an unfinished kitchen and only 1 bathroom. This was a result of prioritizing the house's facade and luxury cars over practicality. Alejandro liked to maintain a sense of superiority, differentiating himself from others. This trait led people to speculate that envy might have motivated the crime. The family's day began at 4:30 a.m. to accommodate everyone using the single bathroom. Alejandro, not satisfied with the local school standards, sent his children to a school 2 hours away, resulting in much of their day spent in the car. He also avoided mingling with neighbors due to economic disparities, leading to his children being isolated and not playing with other kids in the neighborhood. Alejandro was particularly protective of Lorena, noticing that some older men were trying to woo her, despite her being only 13. Sadly, their end was truly tragic. The crime scene in the main bedroom was shocking, leading the officers to examine the other bedrooms with heavy hearts. The first room they entered, adorned in pastel colors, appeared to belong to Lorena, with clothes and various items scattered around. They noticed a sports shoe without laces and cigarette ashes on the bed, along with a bear-shaped lamp missing its cable. There were no signs of blood or the girls. In the next room, they found a body under the sheets, surrounded by blood. Underneath was Lorena's lifeless body with multiple wounds and hands tied with the shoelaces from the sports shoe in the previous room. The last room, more of a storage area without windows, held the lifeless bodies of Erica and Jasmine, their hands bound with the cable from Lorena's bear-shaped lamp. Alejandro Jr., the 3-year-old, was the sole survivor of this massacre. Due to his young age, he couldn't provide reliable testimony, only repeating that a doctor had operated on his mother. Pressuring him for more information would only cause further psychological harm. At that time in Ecatepec, 9 out of 10 crimes went unpunished, leaving residents frustrated with frequent home invasions, robberies, and threats. However, a crime as horrific as this had never occurred before in the area, causing public outrage. People took to the streets in protest in front of police stations and the courthouse, injured by the lack of progress made by the authorities. The situation was further inflamed by negative newspaper headlines criticizing the police. Adding to the pressure, one of Phoebe's sisters was dating the son of the governor at the time, compelling the police to resolve this crime at any cost. The officers in charge were even threatened with job loss if they failed to solve the case. The police surmised that there were likely multiple assailants involved, as Alejandro was athletically built and his body indicated he had been overpowered. Since no doors or windows were forced open, it was assumed the murderer might have entered through the balcony. The murders occurred between 1 and 3 a.m. Another disturbing detail was that Lorena had been assaulted. The police needed to investigate further the fact that the entire family had attended a party for the daughter of a swimming instructor at one of Alejandro's schools. They left the party around 10 p.m., and a family friend drove Phoebe and the children home since Alejandro continued drinking with a friend at another location. At 11 p.m., Alejandro and his friend entered a bar where they drank large amounts of whiskey and rum. Alejandro attempted to leave with a dancer nicknamed Vicky, but she declined and instead left with his friend. Around 1:30 a.m., the friend and Vicky decided to go to a hotel that first dropped Alejandro at his home. Given the timing, the police began to suspect Vicky and the friend, Salvador Galarza, whose statements were inconsistent. Initially, he claimed he saw Alejandro enter his house, but an investigation revealed that Alejandro, having forgotten his keys and being drunk, decided to enter through the balcony. This explained why one of his shoes was found there. Salvador failed to mention that Alejandro had a mistress, who was investigated but seemed unrelated to the crime. After thoroughly investigating Salvador's actions that night, he also appeared not to be the culprit, with his inconsistent testimonies likely due to being extremely drunk. The investigation was exhaustive, with even Phoebe's brother, Doctor, being interrogated, since the child mentioned a doctor operated on his mother. The police explored this lead, along with any other slight clue. They also questioned individuals Alejandro had affected, which were not few in number. For Alejandro, money was paramount, and he didn't hesitate to step on others to achieve his goals. He had recently dismissed several employees from his school without proper severance pay. This issue even reached the courts, but Alejandro won, which many attributed to corruption, as he was acquainted with the judge. Additionally, when constructing the school's swimming pool, he hired an architect but refused to pay after receiving the plans, secretly making copies and having the pool built by other workers. He was also known for stealing business ideas from others in his circle and was infamous for various scams, often not paying when he could get away with it. Lorena's diary revealed that the children were unhappy with the strict lifestyle imposed by their parents. She felt out of place, unable to play with neighborhood kids due to her father's disdain for lower economic classes. She also didn't fit in at her upscale school, where she was mocked for wearing old, outdated clothes and not indulging in luxuries like her classmates. Teachers at the school confirmed Lorena and her sisters were isolated, not mingling with others. This diary entry painted a different picture of Alejandro, contrasting the hardworking image he had cultivated. Despite having the means, he preferred spending on mistresses, alcohol, cars, and maintaining a high-class image, neglecting his children's needs for better clothing and entertainment. Weeks passed without any leads, as there were no security cameras, DNA evidence, or witnesses. Then, on March 17, 1992, the police received an anonymous call from a woman claiming to know the identity of the Chavez Lopez family's murderer, Jose Julio Cipriano Luna, a local metalworker who knew Alejandro. She alleged that the day after the murders, Cipriano stayed near her house, and his clothes, when washed, were covered in blood. In the following days, he was visibly ill, often vomiting. When asked why she delayed reporting this, the woman said she saw Cipriano returning to his old ways and felt it was time. Someone stopped him. She refused further contact, only providing the suspect's supposed address before hanging up. Jose Julio Cipriano Luna, 28 years old, lived in Ecatepec, close to Alejandro's residence. Alejandro, for his automobile restoration projects, required metalworking services, which led him to do business with Cipriano. This connection made Cipriano a person of interest to the police, but they faced a significant hurdle. The anonymous call was not strong enough evidence to incriminate Cipriano, and it was discovered that he lived in another municipality. This posed a jurisdictional issue for the Ecatepec police. At that time, there were no cooperation agreements between police forces, or they required judicial intervention, which could delay the process and risk the suspect fleeing or harming another victim. The only option was to steal the suspect, meaning to detain him in a location outside their jurisdiction for interrogation, hoping for a confession. If they couldn't prove the suspect's culpability immediately, they had to release him. If found guilty, he could then be taken to the appropriate jurisdiction. However, if the local police caught them in the act, their careers could be jeopardized. Despite the risks, on March 20, 1992, 3 officers, Andres Garcia Bomilla, Arturo Martinez, and Ernesto Camarena, decided to carry out this operation in his municipality. They went undercover, avoiding bathing, wearing dirty clothes, and keeping their hair long to blend into the impoverished area. They only had the suspect's name from an anonymous call. Their plan was to inquire about a metalworker near the provided address. However, they soon realized that many in the area were metalworkers. As time was against them, the officers came up with the idea of checking the transparent boxes displaying business permits, which were publicly visible and contained the owner's surnames. In one of these boxes, they found the name Cipriano Luna. When Camarena, who was alone and unarmed at that moment, asked nearby individuals about the metalworker's whereabouts, he received curt and hostile responses, being told that Cipriano no longer worked there and to ask elsewhere. Guided by intuition and the information from the anonymous call that Cipriano lived in his parents' house, the officers eventually found the house and inquired about the metalworker. The officers approached a man who, with suspicion, asked why they were looking for his son. Fortunately, the car the officers were using was damaged, and they managed to convince the man that they needed metalworking services. Believing their story, he informed them that his son, the metalworker, no longer lived there, but was now residing with his mother-in-law. he gave them directions to the new address. After about an hour, the officers located the place. With fewer metalworkers around, they inquired about one and were approached by a man in his mid-20s. Fitting the suspect's description, the challenge now was to get him into the car willingly. Officer Camarena, pretending ignorance about the suspect's identity, fabricated a story about an issue with an engineer, to which the suspect, Cipriano, surprisingly admitted he owed money to an engineer and agreed to discuss it in the car. Once in the vehicle, the officers drove to a secluded area to confront him, hoping for a confession. They avoided mentioning the murders initially, engaging in small talk to ease into the conversation. When they reached the isolated spot, Camarena asked the other officers to step away, intending to speak to Cipriano one-on-one without intimidating him. Unsure how to get Cipriano to talk about the case, Camarena showed him a photo of the Chavez Lopez family. Cipriano's expression remained unchanged, but his eyes widened dramatically, betraying his shock. He tried to maintain composure, denying knowing the family. Officer Camarena confronted him directly about his involvement in the crime, leading Cipriano to break down and offer 10 million pesos for his release, claiming the money was at his father's house. Camarena cleverly did not immediately accept or reject the offer but asked for the location of his father's house, confirming it was the same house they had visited earlier. Pressing further about why Cipriano was so eager to bribe him, Cipriano became visibly nervous. Realizing he had trapped Cipriano, Camarena finally got him to confess to committing the crime. The details Cipriano provided about the house, the timing, and the condition of the bodies deeply disturbed Officer Camarena. He had become obsessed with the case, meticulously investigating every aspect, and learning the gruesome specifics from Cipriano turned his stomach. Cipriano also revealed he had 2 accomplices, one of whom had assaulted Lorena. This new information meant that the police now needed more physical evidence to track down the other 2 culprits. During the investigation, Phoebe's sister was asked to check the Chavez Lopez house for missing items. Among the few things stolen were a videocassette recorder and a gold pendant that she had given to Phoebe. These items were later found at Cipriano's house, confirming his involvement. Cipriano confessed the motive behind orchestrating the murders was rooted in his resentment towards Alejandro. Alejandro had hired Cipriano, a humble metalworker, to restore one of his cars. At one point, Alejandro felt that Cipriano was taking too long to finish the job and decided to retrieve his car from the garage without paying Cipriano the owed 600,000 pesos, equivalent roughly $100. Cipriano harbored deep resentment and anger towards Alejandro, who flaunted his wealth yet refused to pay for services rendered. This resentment grew into fantasies of revenge, which materialized when Cipriano met others who also despised Alejandro. One accomplice, Alejandro Cruz, 18, was a street vendor, while the other was Adam Robledo, 20 years old. On December 1, 1991, the day before the murders, the 3 suspects attended the same party as the Chavez Lopez family. Alejandro was the center of attention at the event, laughing and drinking with his friend. During the night, Cipriano approached Alejandro to ask for the money he was owed, only to be dismissed and told he wouldn't be paid as the job was incomplete. Later that night, Adam, who was infatuated with 13-year-old Lorena, began talking to her. Upon discovering this, Alejandro confronted Adam, berating him and asserting that he had no right to consider himself Lorena's equal or to be near her. Alejandro, tired of the tensions at the party, decided to leave around 10 p.m. Shortly after his departure, a commotion erupted at the party. Adam, who had been pursuing Lorena, was caught with his pants down, assaulting another girl. This scandal quickly spread through the party, resulting in Cipriano, Cruz, and Adam fleeing after stealing kitchen knives for self-defense. Later, as they wandered the neighborhood drunk, they came across Alejandro's house around 2:30 a.m. Cipriano, filled with rage at the sight of Alejandro's wealth and remembering his unpaid debt, decided to take action. Ham, still angry about how Alejandro had treated him earlier, agreed. The third accomplice, Cruz, skilled in picking locks, enabled them to enter the house, leading to the tragic events that unfolded. Adam, exhibiting psychopathic tendencies, even took the time to smoke a cigarette in Lorena's bed after committing the heinous acts. Alejandro, too intoxicated to fight back, was defenseless against the attackers armed with knives. The confessions of the criminals, along with the testimonies of Adam and Cruz, who were quickly apprehended, corroborated the entire story. Each of the three men was sentenced to 250 years in a maximum security prison. The gold pendant found in Cipriano's possession was a critical piece of evidence in the trial. They were confirmed as monstrous individuals, with their confession revealing they hadn't seen any children in the house as they committed the crimes in the dark. This likely spared the life of 3-year-old Alejandro Jr., who was sleeping in his crib at the time. The child later told his grandfather that he had climbed out of his crib, which explained his injury, and unsuccessfully tried to wake his parents before leaving the house. He was eventually found by the mariachi. While Alejandro had made several enemies, the extent of the crime committed by these criminals was far beyond any reasonable retribution for his actions. To end on a positive note, Officer Camarena was recognized and promoted for his work in solving the case, a deserving accolade given the gravity and complexity of the investigation. Born in Oregon in 1975, Stephen Nichols lived a mostly private life until the early 2000s. In his mid-20s, Stephen and his first wife, whose identity remains anonymous for safety reasons, moved to China. During their time there in 2003, she accused him of attempting to suffocate her and throw her off their 8th-floor balcony. Stephen denied these allegations and faced no criminal charges in China. The marriage eventually fell apart, and by 2005, he returned to the U.S. as a single man. He owned a 3-bedroom condo near Portland, Oregon, which was too large for just one person. This led him to search for a roommate online to occupy one of the empty bedrooms, a decision that would profoundly impact several lives. Julia Simmons, a single mom, took immense pride in her eldest daughter, Ronda Casto. Ronda was born on July 2, 1985, in Galveston, Texas, and possessed stunning beauty. Julia's joy was complete with the birth of her second daughter, Melanie, 5 years later. Ronda's striking beauty and charisma seemed destined to bring her success. During her teen years, she embarked on a modeling career, earning the admiration not only of Julia, but also of Jessica Colburn, Julia's best friend from high school. Ronda was not only photogenic, but also had a beauty that ran deeper than mere looks. In 2005, Julia came across Stephen's online advertisement for a roommate and felt it was a perfect fit. After an initial conversation, she found Stephen to be charming and promptly rented a room in his condo, moving in. Then one day, Ronda, a 20-year-old beauty, showed up at Stephen's door, leaving him utterly struck by her allure. She introduced herself, and he was instantly smitten. Stephen believed he sensed reciprocal interest from Ronda, though he couldn't be sure if it was wishful thinking on his part. Never considering himself a handsome man, Stephen believed his intelligence was his most appealing feature and that this attracted Ronda. Whatever her reasons, Ronda responded to Stephen's advances and soon moved into the condo, not as a roommate of her mother's, but as Stephen's girlfriend. Stephen wasn't content with just having Ronda's affection within 3 months of meeting her. He also developed feelings for Melanie, her sister who was still underage at the time. His infidelity remained hidden, and by 2008, although they hadn't married, Stephen and Ronda became parents to a daughter they named Ava. In the meantime, Julia relocated to another condo. Fully committed to motherhood, Ronda lavished Ava with love. However, she was not immune to the postpartum depression that affects a considerable number of women. Ronda was particularly distressed about the weight she had gained during her pregnancy, which posed a challenge to restarting her modeling career. Additionally, Stephen's prolonged absences and hesitancy to propose added to her emotional burden, causing her to feel neglected. Consequently, the relationship between the two began to deteriorate. Ronda's close friend, Jessica, knew about Stephen's infidelity and even asserted that he was physically abusive to Ronda. Despite this, Ronda tried to maintain the relationship for the sake of her daughter, Ava. Towards the end of 2008, both Stephen and Ronda took out life insurance policies, naming each other as beneficiaries, with Ava listed as a contingent beneficiary. In early 2009, Stephen decided to increase his insurance coverage to $1 million. Around the same time, Ronda resolved to return to her modeling career, recognizing the need to improve her physical condition first. Stephen suggested they go on a hike at Eagle Creek, a popular but potentially dangerous trail in the Columbia River Gorge. Ronda informed Julia of their plans and asked her to care for Ava for the day. Before leaving, Ronda made a lighthearted but eerie comment to her mother about the possibility of being murdered. She thought Stephen had planned the hike as a romantic setting to propose to her, or he had darker intentions such as pushing her off a cliff. On the morning of March 16, 2009, the couple woke up early, left their daughter Ava with Julia, and began their hike. Ronda captured the start of their outing with a photo of Stephen. However, the trip was cut short under mysterious circumstances. While ascending the slippery and moss-covered Eagle Creek Trail, they faced several challenges. The inconsistent weather made the trail wet and treacherous. They reached a particularly narrow part of the trail, where only one person could pass at a time. What transpired next remains an enigma, known only to the couple. According to Stephen's account, Ronda was in a playful mood and had jokingly draped a towel over her shoulders, dubbing herself Supergirl. She started running and then slipped, falling from a height of over 150 feet. Stephen claimed that he spent an hour looking for her through rain-soaked terrain. When he finally found her and attempted CPR, he collapsed from exhaustion. Back at home, Julia grew increasingly anxious as the day wore on. Eventually, Stephen awoke, but with no cell service to call for assistance, he made his way back to the trailhead. Around 6 p.m., he finally reached his car and called 911. Rescue arrived roughly an hour later, determining Ronda's injuries to be consistent with a fall. Her death was initially ruled an accident. In the aftermath, Julia received a visit from a chaplain, sent by the local fire department, who regretfully informed her that her daughter was gone forever. In the days that followed, Ronda's family and friends gathered to pay their last respects at her funeral. To Julia, Stephen's behavior during the ordeal seemed unusually detached and lacking in genuine grief. Although media coverage of the incident in 2009 was sparse, initial reports suggested that the police didn't suspect foul play. Despite this, county detectives took their investigation very seriously and began to scrutinize Stephen's account more closely. Julia's persistent insistence, driven by her hope of accusing Stephen of her daughter's murder, also played a pivotal role in prompting a more in-depth investigation. Stephen cooperated fully during police questioning. The forensic examiner reported that most of Ronda's injuries were below the waist and also found traces of various prescription medications for anxiety and depression in her system. While authorities stopped short of definitively ruling Ronda's death as an accident, Stephen was not charged with any crime. Shortly thereafter, he moved to another part of the state, taking Eva with him. Surprisingly, less than 6 months after Ronda's death, Stephen faced charges for sexually abusing a 13-year-old girl, allegations he has consistently denied. His legal troubles persisted when he attempted to claim Ronda's life insurance money. The insurance company refused the payout, arguing that the policy was void due to inaccuracies in the application. Furthermore, it remained uncertain whether Stephen, as the policy's beneficiary, might have been involved in Ronda's death. If so, he could be ineligible for the payout under Oregon law. A federal district judge later ruled that the $1 million should be placed in an interest-bearing account under court control. The insurance company's lawyers agreed that the money would go to the couple's daughter once she reached adulthood. Stephen's insistence on claiming the life insurance money only deepened suspicions about him, providing Julia with what she believed to be clear evidence of his ulterior, financially motivated motives for allegedly murdering Ronda. The legal process wasn't progressing as quickly as Ronda's mother had hoped. 4 years after the incidents in 2013, Stephen still had not faced any charges. Eager for a fresh start, he relocated to a distant yet familiar place, China. In this far-off but now recognizable setting, he moved to Wuxi, situated 120 kilometers from Shanghai. Here, he found employment as an English teacher for Chinese business professionals. According to his own account, Eva acclimated seamlessly, mastering Mandarin in just 2 months. Besides being fluent in Mandarin, she participated in dance courses, took taekwondo training, and started learning the piano. Progress was evident for Stephen as well, as he found love once more. Back in the United States, investigators were continuously working on Ronda's case. Unbeknownst to Stephen, Julia, for her part, maintained his guilt and pressed the authorities. Then, in a turn of events that caught everyone off guard, true crime writer Stephen Jackson entered the picture in April 2014 and set things in motion. A grand jury reviewed the evidence and covertly indicted Stephen for murder. All the while, he remained in China, completely unaware of the judicial trap being set more than 11,000 kilometers away. The relationship between Stephen and his new partner, Landy, was growing stronger to the extent that Landy had stepped into a maternal role for Eva. Within less than a year, Stephen proposed to Landy, and she said yes. The couple planned to have 2 wedding ceremonies, one in the United States and another in China. To initiate their plans, Stephen and Eva flew to the U.S. in February 2015, with Landy set to join them shortly thereafter. However, upon their arrival in San Francisco, airport personnel informed Stephen that there was an issue with his luggage. Instead of continuing on to his connecting flight to Oregon, Stephen was separated from Eva and taken into custody by detectives from San Mateo County, California. They interrogated him about Ronda's death, but he declined to discuss the matter. Despite his reticence, the questioning persisted for about 3 hours. Stephen was subsequently extradited to Oregon, while Eva was placed in the care of Ronda's family. Right after his arrest for murder, Stephen was charged with 2 counts of rape in the 3rd degree, and 3 counts of rape in the 4th degree, and 3 counts of 3rd-degree sodomy for allegedly engaging in sexual intercourse with Melanie, his sister-in-law, when she was a minor. Once again, Stephen denied all accusations and entered a not guilty plea. His attorney highlighted the unconstitutional nature of the 3-hour police questioning. The defense even assembled their own team of investigators to visit Eagle Creek Trail, aiming to demonstrate that Ronda's death was the result of an accidental fall. During this period, Stephen faced various pretrial hearings that delved into multiple issues, including the available evidence and the motive behind Ronda's death. The defense argued that her death had been an accident, raising questions about the necessity of a trial. On the other side, law enforcement revisited the site where Ronda fell and conducted an unusual test using crash test dummies matching her size and weight to explore the theory that she had been pushed. Despite mounting pressure, Stephen remained resolute in his denial of guilt, maintaining that he had genuinely loved Ronda. In August 2015, he attended a bail hearing. His lawyer, Arnold, scrutinized the scientific validity of the tests surrounding Ronda's fall and centered the defense on the notion that her death had been a tragic accident. Arnold emphasized that Ronda was the fourth fatality on that particular trail in just 6 months, arguing that similar incidents were more common than most people believed. Christopher, the forensic doctor, testified that Ronda's severe injuries were all below her waist, suggesting she had primarily landed on her legs and pelvis. Arnold interpreted this as evidence that Ronda had slipped feet first. If she had been pushed, the injuries would have been more widespread across her body. However, Julia countered these arguments by stating that Stephen had ample motive to harm her daughter, accusing him of being both abusive and unfaithful. A bail amount of $2 million was set, and Stephen, unable to secure this sum, returned to jail. Meanwhile, Jessica mustered the courage to visit the location where her best friend Ronda had fallen for the first time. By May 2017, after numerous hearings debating the admissibility of evidence, including Stephen's admission of a sexual relationship with Melanie, it seemed that his long-awaited trial was approaching. But in a twist that shocked and disappointed Ronda's loved ones, a settlement conference led to a surprising outcome. The prosecution and defense reached an agreement allowing Stephen to plead guilty to lesser charges, specifically criminal negligent homicide and coercion, thereby removing the murder charge from the equation. The assistant county prosecutor acknowledged that while they believed Stephen was guilty, the challenge lay in the lack of adequate evidence to bring before a jury. To secure a murder conviction, the prosecution needed to demonstrate Stephen's intent in causing Ronda's death. As defense attorney Arnold emphasized, there was a dearth of concrete evidence, only vague hints and conjectures. Complicating matters further, a significant amount of evidence was lost when the detective handling the case retired and wiped his computer files. This development was a devastating blow for Julia, who was left angry and frustrated. Jessica was also in disbelief, seeing it as a glaring gap in the justice system. Arnold consistently defended his client, arguing that innocent individuals often enter guilty pleas to achieve a particular outcome. He stated that dropping the charges enabled Stephen to continue pursuing custody of his daughter, Ava. The defense was aware of various issues plaguing the juvenile court system, where delays could significantly impede a child's reunion with their parents. Stephen himself confirmed that this was the sole reason he agreed to the deal. He received credit for time already served and was placed on a 3-year probation. His ankle monitor was removed, effectively ending his time in incarceration. Back on the streets, he remained concerned about the situation with Ava. But in 2018, in an explosive television interview, Stephen admitted for the first time to behaving inappropriately with a minor and also acknowledged having sexual relations with Melanie.
Melanie?
Correct. What were you thinking? I wasn't. It was a very stupid decision. When questioned about killing one sister to be with the other, he remained evasive, even defiant. Moreover, he told a new story on camera, stating that Ronda didn't slip, but, due to postpartum depression, took her own life.
But lead people to think that you killed one sister to be with the other sister.
You can believe whatever you want. Some people are gonna believe that I'm innocent. Some are gonna think I'm guilty. So, I believe what you want to believe. Julia reacted strongly to his claims, asserting that, despite the medication her daughter was on, Ronda would have been incapable of making such a decision, especially considering how much she loved Ava. However, this turn of events further complicated Stephen's quest to regain custody of his daughter. Adding another layer of complexity to the already intricate case, Julia was sentenced to 30 days in a rehab facility and received a 3-year probation term after admitting to unlawfully claiming $39,124 in Social Security benefits meant for her granddaughter. She was also mandated to repay the sum. While some reports suggest that a 2018 ruling terminated Stephen's parental rights and placed Ava in foster care, there is no official confirmation of this. Meanwhile, the insurance payout from her mother's policy remains in a bank account, said to be accessible when Ava turns 18. Currently a teenager, Ava continues to be under state care. Molly Bish was born on August 2, 1983, in Warren, Massachusetts. She was the youngest of 3 children in the Bish family. With her siblings Heather and John Jr., Molly was a bright, responsible, and dearly loved and active girl. The Bish family originally hailed from Detroit, Michigan, but they moved to Massachusetts in search of a better future. The reason for their relocation was a disturbing crime that occurred in their Detroit neighborhood. A young woman had been kidnapped on her way home from work and later found murdered. The Bish couple thought Warren would be a much safer place to raise their children, and this seemed to hold true for the next 15 years. Molly, always seeking new activities, had taken a summer job as a lifeguard at Commons Pond in Warren. She was excited about this opportunity as it was her brother John Jr.'s former job, and he had requested that Molly be given the chance to continue in his place. Molly was fully committed to her job and wanted to perform it to the best of her ability to make her brother proud. On June 26, 2000, Magi accompanied Molly to the pond for her 7th day of work. When they arrived at the parking lot, Magi noticed a strange man. He was smoking the cigarette and sitting in a new white car. His presence made her uncomfortable. She looked at him, but he didn't acknowledge her. Magi accompanied Molly to her lifeguard station and stayed a little longer, hoping the man would be gone when she returned to the parking lot. However, when she got back to her vehicle, the stranger was still there. They locked eyes for several seconds, and fearing for Molly's safety, Magi waited inside her car for several minutes until the unknown man finally left. On June 27, 2000, Molly's 8th day on the job, she and her mother stopped at a local store just before 10 in the morning. Molly purchased everything she needed for her shift as a lifeguard. When they arrived at the isolated pond surrounded by mostly woods, Magi dropped off her daughter, who hurried to her station since she was running a bit late. Molly arrived a few minutes later at her station and quickly set up her chair, towel, and all her work equipment just after 10 in the morning. Swimming lessons were scheduled to begin soon, and she wanted everything in order to welcome the children. The beach was officially open, but Molly was alone, and it seemed that everyone was running late that day. No houses overlooked the water, and the beach wasn't visible from the road, which was located at the end of a dead-end street. In all directions, there were only trees. At 10 in the morning, Sandra and her children arrived to set up camp, followed by other families. They looked around for Molly but couldn't find her at her workstation. That morning, Molly hadn't used her police radio, which was part of her daily routine. Besides the open first aid kit, there was nothing to indicate that she had been engaged in any activities there. Even her shoes were neatly placed in front of her chair. When swimming lessons ended, one of the parents contacted Park Commissioner to report that Molly had disappeared, as it was uncharacteristic of her to leave her workstation unattended. The Park Commissioner arrived at the beach shortly after 11 in the morning, and at 11:44, he used his two-way radio to inform the police that the young girl had not shown up. He also examined her personal belongings left at the scene. From that point onward, some irregular events occurred that raised suspicions. At some point between noon and the afternoon, he ran into John Jr. at a hardware store, and for an unknown reason, he didn't mention that Molly had disappeared. Another irregularity was that the police didn't contact Molly's mother until 1 in the afternoon, 3 hours after Magi had dropped her off at her new job. Part of the reason for the delay, according to some accounts, was that people thought Molly might have gotten a ride to visit a friend, which was a logical assumption considering she had left her belongings by her workstation. Alarmed after receiving the call about her daughter's absence, the mother hurried to the location, where she found Molly's sandals, chair, first aid kit, radio, and lunch by the shore. However, there was no sign of her. Hours later, after the scene of the disappearance, and any potential evidence had been trampled by beachgoers, children, dogs, and curious onlookers who roamed freely, the police realized that their initial assessments might have been wrong. The first theory that Molly had simply gone off with friends made sense for an ordinary teenager, but not for someone as responsible as she was. So the second theory gained strength, suggesting that Molly had drowned in the pond. At that moment, it seemed the most plausible explanation. It's worth noting that Warren was the kind of small town where nothing much happened, and there were no records of violent crimes. With its picturesque houses and natural beauty, it seemed like a safe place to raise a family. In fact, that was the reason the Bish couple had moved there in the first place. Police investigation began with the basics, analyzing the teenagers' belongings and work tools, and something chilling occurred. The unknown man became a suspect because all witnesses saw how he touched and examined everything within his reach upon arriving at the disappearance scene, without gloves or care. Magi informed officers that she had seen a mysterious man lurking around the pond in the days before. With this information, the county sheriff's office initiated an investigation. The local worker testified that he had seen the same man in the white sit-in, but he didn't see him in Molly's worksite parking lot. The car was parked near a nearby cemetery that was connected to the pond by a short path. On the morning of June 27, the day of Molly's disappearance, a truck was unloading sand for the beach. In the investigation, the truck driver was questioned, and he reported seeing the man parked in the lot a few minutes before Magi and Molly arrived. Police officers searched the pond and the surrounding woods but couldn't find Molly. Although there were no signs of a struggle at the scene, both the police and her family were convinced she had been abducted. The police focused their investigation on the unknown man in the white car, based on descriptions provided by Magi, and the two witnesses. A composite sketch of the man was created and circulated. He was described as a man with brown hair, dark eyes, and approximately 50 years old, possibly a heavy smoker since everyone who saw him mentioned he had a cigarette in hand. Simultaneously, a thorough investigation was launched, including the examination of local sex offenders to identify any matching the suspect's description, but no identification was made. The investigation into Molly's case became the largest and most costly search for a missing person ever conducted in the state of Massachusetts. The abduction gained significant notoriety and extensive media coverage. Following Molly's forced absence, her family created a website to spread awareness of the case to a broader audience. They also established an email chain to reach as many people as possible. Over 30,000 U.S. residents received emails about her disappearance. In 2001, Magi reached out to the renowned sketch artist, who agreed to create a composite sketch of Molly's abductor. The two met at a place, which are private accommodations in both rural and urban settings that offer bed and breakfast at rates lower than local hotels. They spent 9 hours chatting while they worked on the composite sketch. When it was completed, Magi felt it was accurate, except for one detail. She requested the artist to update the drawing to include a cigarette in the man's hand. The next day, when the artist showed her the updated result, Maggie was certain that the composite sketch was identical to the man she had seen. In May 2003, a hunter reported finding a blue swimsuit. He contacted the police because he had seen information about Molly's case and knew that she had been wearing a blue swimsuit when she disappeared. This lead turned out to be of great significance, and an intensive search in the forest began immediately. Tracking efforts, involving experts of various kinds, continued for several years. Finally, on June 9, 2003, Molly's body was discovered a little over 8 kilometers from her home. The official cause of death was not disclosed, but it was known that she had been murdered and buried in the dense vegetation on Whiskey Hill. The police continued their relentless efforts to find the person responsible, not just for the kidnapping, but for Molly's homicide. However, the case quickly went cold. In 2005, a man with a striking resemblance to the composite sketch was considered a suspect in an attempted kidnapping, but he couldn't be linked to Molly's case. In 2007, a registered sex offender was identified after attempting to abduct and assault a jogger just a few kilometers from Warren. He also matched the description of the suspect, but the police didn't press charges, and the reasons were never made public. In 2009, Rodney Stanger, who had recently been convicted of murder, became the prime suspect in Molly's abduction and murder. He had lived just a few kilometers from the town where Molly resided and moved to Florida shortly after her disappearance. Rodney also drove a white car, frequently fished at Commons Pond, and was an avid hunter in the area where Molly's body was found. He also fit the description that Molly's mother had provided to the police of the man she saw in a white sit-in. However, Rodney was never charged in the case as the police couldn't establish beyond a reasonable doubt that he was the perpetrator. After this significant setback, the case went cold once again. In November 2011, a confidential informant, who had been providing information to the Special Operations Group, became the new suspect. The individual identified as Gerald Battistoni attempted suicide while in prison after learning that he was considered a person of interest in Molly's case. Gerald also lived in the area where the teenager disappeared and had an extensive criminal record dating back to the 1980s. His DNA was analyzed in Texas, where he was serving his sentence, but the man passed away in November 2014 and was not charged with the crime. In June 2016, it was announced that enhanced DNA testing would be applied to 24 samples that had not yet been analyzed. A year later, in June 2017, investigators claimed to have found compelling information in the case. This information led them to a campground where the car allegedly used in Molly's abduction was supposedly buried. Multiple areas of interest were identified using ground-penetrating radar. The information was related to a new suspect who had lived at the campground around the time of Molly's abduction. At that time, he owned a white car similar to the one seen in the pond's parking lot. A witness stated that the man had told him something bad had happened and that he had been in the woods all night when Molly disappeared. He also reportedly had bloodshot scratches on his face. However, the man denied any involvement in the case, and it's unclear whether anything incriminating was found during the 2017 search. In 2019, new tests were conducted using more advanced technology in the hope of obtaining additional data to analyze the case's evidence. Investigators were hopeful that they could obtain a DNA profile with the new procedures, but the wheels of justice would once again turn slowly for Molly. On June 3, 2021, Worcester County District Attorney Joseph Early announced that Francis P. Sumner Sr. was a new person of interest in the case. According to reports at the time, it was not possible to arrest him because he had been found dead in his home 5 years earlier. However, the police received a verifiable lead that Francis was involved in Molly's disappearance. Because the investigation is still ongoing, authorities cannot provide many details about the case against Francis, but his criminal history is part of the reason he became a suspect. He had amassed a long list of crimes during his life and had served concurrent sentences for multiple abuses against women in the area where Molly worked. Police had received several tips about him over the years, and this time, the information given in the tips could be corroborated and verified. Francis had been convicted of kidnapping and raping a young woman who had gone to his auto repair shop in 1981. He was released on parole in 1998. just 2 years before Molly's disappearance. He lived not far from where Molly disappeared. He also resembled the composite sketch of the suspect. Unfortunately, he died in 2016 without facing charges in the case. Investigators continue to seek more information about him. When the existence of a new suspect was announced, the Bish family granted several interviews. Molly's older sister, Heather, told a media outlet that she believed investigators were doing everything possible with the information about the new suspect. As part of the effort to determine Francis's involvement, the police went to Ohio to obtain a DNA sample from his son, who was serving a federal prison sentence. This would enable them to conduct DNA analysis to establish a match with the deceased offender. Heather stated that someone like Francis, a convicted sex offender and rapist, should have been on the sex offender registry. This would have allowed them to approach him in the early stages of the investigation, and perhaps the case could have been closed with less trauma for everyone involved. In the same interview, Molly's sister pointed out that the conclusion of the investigation, which has spanned decades, would bring peace to her family. While they will always miss Molly, at least they won't have to keep trying to figure out who was responsible for her absence. Molly Bish's disappearance sparked the largest search for a missing person in the history of the state of Massachusetts. As of 2023, the case remains unresolved. The family believes they are nearing the end of the search for the culprit, although they are also aware that there is a very high likelihood that there may never be complete closure. Her killer has not yet been apprehended, but the case remains open, and the investigation is ongoing. A reward of $100,000 is still being offered for information leading to a definitive resolution. Molly's disappearance has turned her parents into staunch advocates for child safety. They hope that through their efforts, they can prevent other children from becoming victims of predators. Maria Belen was born on March 14, 1988, in Quito, Ecuador. Maria studied law at the Central University, where she graduated as a lawyer. She later obtained a specialization and a master's in criminal law from the Andean University Simón Bolívar, and also held a master's in oral litigation from the California Western School of Law. She was pursuing another master's degree in criminal procedural law at an Ecuadorian university. Additionally, she worked for Defensa Penal Group, part of a team of 6 women primarily handling criminal cases. In 2017, Maria married Lieutenant Herman Cáceres, a police officer. They met after he helped rescue her and her family during a robbery. Following this traumatic event, they continued to communicate and eventually fell in love, moving together to southern Quito. Despite having a child from a previous relationship and being a dedicated mother, Maria successfully balanced her time between her family and career. She became a respected litigator, especially known for her extensive knowledge of criminal procedures. One of her most prominent cases was representing the family of Alejandro Palas, who died in March 2021 after being hit by a patrol car from the Metropolitan Transit Agency of Quito. Maria demonstrated the agent's responsibility in the incident, attributing it to an intensive maneuver that prevented Palas from avoiding the accident. She also handled cases of sexual assault, gender violence, police defense, and alimony, aware that her role as a criminal lawyer had earned her enemies. In mid-2022, she named 2 individuals on TikTok, holding them responsible if anything were to happen to her. On the morning of Sunday, September 11, Maria entered the General Alberto Enriquez Gallo Police School in north of Quito to bring a hamburger to her husband, Lieutenant Cáceres, who was on duty inside the school. That night, there was a party at the police facility, attended by officers and cadets, unknown to Maria. Upon entering the police school to find her husband, she was surprised to discover him in his room with Cadet Jocelyn Sanchez, who immediately left the scene. The timeline of the events of September 11 is still unclear, with many details omitted by the police. However, according to some witnesses, Maria and Cáceres had a violent argument in his dormitory that night. Subsequent to Maria Belen's disappearance, Cadet Sanchez, who was involved in the incident, later recounted disturbing details. According to Sanchez, Lieutenant Cáceres assaulted Maria Belen for at least 20 minutes, during which Maria Belen screamed in pain and pleaded for help. It was also revealed that a cadet, alarmed by Maria Belen's cries and requests for assistance, alerted a superior officer about the fight. However, the superior ordered the cadet not to intervene, insisting that no one should get involved in a husband and wife's problems. Despite at least 20 police members hearing the commotion, no one intervened to help the defenseless woman, and nothing was known of her whereabouts after that night. Cadet Sanchez recalled that Maria Belen's screams suddenly stopped, followed by a profound silence. Shortly thereafter, she heard Cáceres leaving the bedroom. Sanchez reported hearing Cáceres dragging something heavy, bumping against the stairs of the police residence. Although the police school's sentry logged Maria Belen's entry, her exit was never recorded. On September 12, Maria Belen's mother, Elizabeth, received a life-altering call. Around 2 p.m., Cáceres contacted her to inquire if Maria Belen was with her. According to Cáceres, his wife hadn't returned home following an argument while heading to their residence. He claimed that Maria Belen exited their car and took a taxi. Elizabeth pressured Cáceres to report Maria Belen's disappearance to the authorities, but he excused himself, saying his superiors wouldn't allow him to leave work for this task. Elizabeth, undeterred, requested one of Cáceres' superiors to permit him to file the report. That evening around 5:30, Maria Belen's disappearance was officially reported. The next morning, Cáceres provided a version of events to the police and was even taken to the avenue where he claimed his wife got into a taxi. However, he couldn't pinpoint the exact location where she supposedly crossed the busy avenue, an unlikely place for a taxi to stop in the middle of the night. In an interview with an Ecuadorian digital media outlet, Elizabeth recounted that when Maria Belen's disappearance was reported, police officers found small blood spots on Cáceres' mattress in his dormitory. When officers prepared to collect a sample, Cáceres objected, stating a judicial order was needed for such a procedure and insisting on the presence of his lawyer during any examinations. These events unfolded in front of Elizabeth, who actively followed the official search for her missing daughter from the beginning. Doubts about Cáceres' involvement grew. He was detained for 8 hours for investigative purposes, as the law allows, but was released after his statement because the prosecutor found insufficient grounds for pretrial detention. The following morning, Cáceres did not report to work at the police station. Neighbors reported that between 10:40 p.m. on September 13 and 4 a.m. on September 14, Cáceres fled. Elizabeth recounted these events during her appearance before the National Assembly of Ecuador on September 27, highlighting the irregularities in the case. Following the main suspect's escape, the prosecutor's office criticized the police for not surveilling Cáceres adequately. Following the disappearance of Maria Belen, the police institution reported that the order for surveillance of Lieutenant Cáceres, the main suspect, was issued after he had already fled. Maria's mother, Elizabeth, believed that the security forces and judicial system failed to ensure safety and due process, allowing the suspect to escape. Of the 20 police officials present at the party on the night of Maria's disappearance, including high-ranking ones who ordered others to remain silent, only Cadet Sanchez was arrested. She was accused of having heard the entire incident and not acting. Sanchez's lawyer told the media that she and Lieutenant Cáceres had a special friendship and denied any romantic relationship. Security cameras at the police school showed that Cáceres left the premises twice on the night of September 11. The first time he was gone for 15 minutes, but the second time he was away for at least 4 hours. During this interval, Cáceres contacted a cadet identified as Ned H&M, a friend of Sanchez, whose house was searched by authorities on September 22. After Maria's disappearance, the Ecuadorian government offered a $20,000 reward for Cáceres' capture. Public scrutiny fell on Diego Ordóñez, the security secretary, and Patricio Carrillo, the interior minister, for their handling of the case. Ordóñez emphasized the importance of safeguarding the police's institutional reputation, while Carrillo had left the country amidst the case's uproar. In response to public pressure and protests demanding the truth about Maria's disappearance, Carrillo announced that the police school would be led by women. The police also started administrative processes against 12 members, ranging from colonel to sergeant, but no further arrests were made, leaving only Sanchez in custody. Elizabeth consistently demanded the truth about her daughter's fate, expressing frustration over the lack of case resolution on social media. Carrillo, then the interior minister, promised to resign if Maria was not found within 30 days. Subsequently, a large police contingent was deployed to search for Maria. Elizabeth criticized the police for not effectively searching for her daughter and recounted searching through garbage dumps and ravines herself. On September 21, human remains were found near the police school. Later that day, President Guillermo Lasso and Minister Carrillo confirmed Maria's femicide via Twitter, vowing to bring the perpetrators to justice and offering condolences to her family. Carrillo apologized to Maria's family at a press conference covered by major media outlets. The case continued to draw significant public attention and scrutiny over the handling of the investigation and the search for the responsible parties. While Minister Carrillo was addressing the media, hundreds of citizens gathered in Quito to demand that the state not let the femicide of Maria Belen go unpunished and to show her mother that she was not alone. The march, which traveled one of the city's main avenues and reached the police headquarters, was led by feminist organizations and accompanied by relatives of thousands of disappeared people in Ecuador. Amidst posters and photographs of Maria Belen, the demonstrators sang Canción Sin Miedo, which has become an anthem of the feminist movement in the region, with adaptations for the Ecuadorian case. A feminist activist who followed Maria Belen's case and publicly spoke about the police's actions and government blunders, told the international news agency Infobae that the presence of hundreds of women on the streets was due to feeling mocked, vulnerable, and, above all, fed up. In a statement, 29 feminist organizations declared themselves in permanent mobilization until the full truth about the disappearance and femicide of Maria Belen was known. They rejected Minister Carrillo's version, which labeled the case as a crime of passion, minimizing the institutional complicities within the police that concealed the aggression, failed to intervene, and allowed the main suspects escape. On September 22, the Central University of Ecuador's theater, where Maria Belen earned her law degree, was filled with family, friends, activists, journalists, and citizens attending the wake in her honor. Elizabeth arrived at noon, accompanied by the funeral procession carrying her daughter's coffin. Mourning amidst media flashes and microphones, Elizabeth called for independent experts to investigate her daughter's case and demanded to know the truth. Maria Belen's son also attended the wake, and on September 23, Maria Belen was buried. Maria Belen Bernal's disappearance and murder have raised questions about police training and suspicions of a possible cover-up by Cáceres officers and subordinates. The case has sparked debate on whether Maria Belen's femicide should be considered a state crime. The incident shook Ecuador to the extent that, on September 23, President Lasso, who described the lawyer's murder as femicide, asked for Minister Carrillo's resignation as Interior Minister, effective immediately. He also ordered the dismissal of 2 police generals, the National Director of Police Judicial Investigation, and the head of Citizen Security and Public Order. Additionally, President Lasso requested the resignation of the entire police high command and gave the police commander, Fausto Salinas, a week to deliver definitive results leading to Cáceres' capture. Since Maria Belen's body was found, suspicions about the investigators' inefficiency have increased. The police stated that the remains were wrapped in a blanket and buried in a steep hill. However, photographs of the site show a blanket in perfect condition, which, according to the official version, should have been buried for at least 10 days with a decomposing body. Salinas, the police commander, provided details of the autopsy and part of the investigations to an Ecuadorian radio station. However, Police Commander Salinas' statement that Maria died by strangulation has raised suspicions, especially since bloodstains were found in Cáceres' room and car when luminol was applied. This has led feminist organizations and several lawyers to argue that the police are both judge and party in this case, leading to calls for an impartial entity to ensure the investigation is conducted with the utmost transparency. While the police prioritize finding Cáceres and debates continue over state responsibility, the international community awaits the involvement of international experts and oversight by the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights in the investigation. Maria Belen's family is shattered. Her mother insists that Maria Belen should not become just another statistic among the 206 femicides recorded in Ecuador until September 3, 2022. Before the National Assembly, she demanded speed and transparency in the investigation. Protection was also requested for Maria Belen's best friend, who, since September 15, had heard strong rumors about the location of the body, found only days later on September 21. This suggests that authorities did not give due attention to this crucial information. Furthermore, this friend, whose identity is being protected, has received threatening calls from the police. Recent information indicates that Lieutenant Cáceres left Ecuador on the same day the police and prosecutor's office refused to detain him. Surveillance cameras captured him riding his motorcycle across Ecuador to the Colombian border. In Colombia, he traveled to Medellin, where he was last seen in his motorcycle, as reported by Colombian and Ecuadorian media on October 5, 2022. On December 30, 2022, he was arrested in Palomino, La Guajira, Colombia, while working as a bartender. Cáceres, the main suspect in Maria Belen's femicide, was identified through his use of Ecuadorian slang, leading to his capture. He now faces 34 years and 8 months in prison, the maximum penalty in Ecuador for femicide, as reported by local media. Sarah Nicole Graham, born on April 1, 1996, in the United States, remains a subject shrouded in mystery as specific details of her birth and early life remain undisclosed. Sarah's upbringing was under the care of her mother in Texas, sharing a joyful childhood with her brother, though their names are absent in the records detailing Sarah's life. Described as a sweet, responsible, and initially shy girl when meeting new individuals, Sarah's spontaneous and lively nature would shine through once she became comfortable. From the information gathered, we learned about her father, Hubert Graham, a direct descendant of the indigenous people of America. This lineage connected Sarah to the Lumbee tribe, predominantly situated in the counties of Robeson, Hoke, and Scotland and North Carolina. The Lumbee tribe emerged from the remnants of extinct tribes, grouping in a recognized area since 1956, when Congress passed the Lumbee Act, officially recognizing them as Native Americans. However, the act also withheld federal recognition benefits, denying them sovereignty, land rights, and other advantages afforded to different tribes. Despite generations of fighting against this discrimination, they remain without a reservation, though they do congregate in a specific area. Pembroke, located in Robeson County, North Carolina, serves as the cultural, economic, and political hub for the Lumbee tribe. Sarah journeyed there in 2014 after finishing high school, possibly aiming to connect with her genealogical roots. At 18, she aspired to relocate to Fairmont, a quaint rural town north of the North Carolina-South Carolina border, to live with her father, Hubert, her stepmother, Connie Graham, and a stepbrother, though details about him remained elusive. By then, Hubert and Connie held positions as assistants to the sheriff of the county, earning them respect within the community. While little is publicly known about Sarah's relationship with her father and stepmother, all signs pointed to her enjoying the newfound connection with her ancestral culture, having grown up in a different state. Upon settling in Fairmont, Sarah eagerly sought employment, quickly landing a job as a receptionist and cashier at Walmart in Pembroke. Her excellent communication skills and friendly demeanor quickly made her an indispensable team member. Sarah was a responsible and kind-hearted young woman, popular among her colleagues, and was beginning to form friendships. In just 2 months of reconnecting with her ethnic roots, Sarah was thriving and genuinely happy. However, on the morning of Wednesday, February 4, 2015, something changed. Although she woke up early and prepared for her 7 a.m. work shift at Walmart, she never arrived. Her supervisor immediately noticed her absence, given her previously consistent punctuality and commitment. That very day, the white Chevrolet van, loaned to her by her father and under his name, was found abandoned. At around 12:15 p.m., police received reports of a seemingly deserted vehicle located several meters from the road, near a cornfield, marking the beginning of a concerning mystery. When the officers approached the area, they were able to confirm that it was indeed the van Sarah usually drove. It was already quite strange that it was parked there, seemingly abandoned, and without the young girl in sight. The situation became even murkier when witnesses claimed they had seen the vehicle parked there since 6:45 a.m. This statement set off alarms, as it meant that the van had stopped there just 15 minutes after Sarah had left her house. It was a puzzle that no one could decipher at that moment. The officers inspected the vehicle and the surrounding area for any clues or traces that could guide the investigation into Sarah's whereabouts. However, the task proved difficult. There was no damage to the van, no signs of a struggle around it, and no tracks of shoe prints being dragged on the ground, which could have indicated an abduction. A mysterious aspect of the case revolved around the fact that the van was locked. Speculations were made that someone must have manually locked the door with the car key. However, many older vehicles, like the one Sarah was using, allow the driver to manually lock the doors and close them without using the key. In many cases, cars get locked by accident. With the discovery of the abandoned van, the Fairmont Police Department activated the missing person search protocol. Along with police officers, 140 local volunteers and a canine unit participated. However, there were challenges, the first being that Robeson County is the largest in North Carolina, making the search extensive and primarily in a rural area. As a result, the search was not easy, and even a helicopter had to be used. Concurrently, the process of printing missing person flyers began. Sarah was described on the flyers as a Native American young woman, 5'7" tall, weighing 150 pounds, with short brown hair, wearing corrective glasses and braces. Robeson County has just over 100,000 permanent residents, though it is known to temporarily house many migrant workers. The area also has a rather negative reputation, being known for significant drug trafficking activity. This is due to its strategic location, situated halfway between Miami, Florida, and New York on Interstate 95, making it a popular stop for traffickers. Amidst this scenario, with many people coming and going without proper records or tracking, figuring out what happened to the young girl seemed like a Herculean task. Local and state officials joined the search, but without significant results. A month later, FBI agents joined the search, yet they too were unable to find any trace of Sarah. Her family had no contact with her, nor did they receive ransom demands or any communication from supposed kidnappers asking for favors in exchange for her safe return. The general consensus in the town was that she had vanished into thin air. On March 18, 6 months after Sarah's disappearance, Connie, her stepmother, was dismissed from her position as an assistant at the sheriff's office. She had worked there for 23 years, and her sudden dismissal raised eyebrows and fueled suspicion and rumors. The sheriff announced the news but refused to provide further details, labeling it a personal decision. He also stated that the dismissal was not related to Sarah's disappearance, though this did little to quell public suspicions. In a statement, He also expressed understanding of the public's eagerness for information, but requested patience, stating that releasing specific case details could jeopardize the integrity of the investigation and hinder efforts to find Sarah. He assured that the Robeson County Sheriff's Office detectives, in collaboration with the FBI, were working tirelessly on the case and vowed not to stop until Sarah was found. After Connie's dismissal was made public, sources close to the investigation said that the FBI considered Connie a suspect in the case, adding that an arrest and charges could be forthcoming. Once this information was disseminated, all eyes turned to the Graham residence. However, as time passed, the hypothesis that the stepmother was involved in Sarah's disappearance was never proven. In fact, she was not arrested for questioning, nor were charges brought against her, and she was never named a person of interest. Despite this, public opinion on social media at the time and over the years has consistently suggested that she might be involved. While there hasn't been any official statement, rumors suggested that Connie's son and Sarah's stepbrother was a problematic boy, and that he was responsible for the young girl's disappearance. The rumors spread on social media talked about a romantic interest bordering on obsession from the stepbrother, to which Sarah never responded. On the contrary, she seemed annoyed by his persistence. A year after Sarah's disappearance, there was very little information available about her case. It seemed as if the earth had swallowed her up. On the first anniversary, FBI agents and local officers conducted an operation where they distributed flyers with Sarah's details and images to drivers passing through the area where the teenager's van was found. At that time, the officers insisted that although they had little information about the young girl, who had only been living in the place for 2 months when she disappeared, it was clear that her disappearance was not usual. They stated that she would not have left without notice, and if she had, she would have contacted her parents to at least inform them that she was well and in another place. In December 2018, human remains were found near the railroad tracks about 3 kilometers from the lumber bridge in Riley County. Later, it was determined that they belonged to a female, and immediately, people thought it could be Sarah. On December 13, 2018, it was announced that Sarah's dental records were sent to Riley County to see if there was a match with the young girl. A second set of dental records was sent to the office of the forensic chief medical officer in Riley. However, it was later confirmed that it was not Sarah. In 2022, the Federal Bureau of Investigation made another appeal asking for information to find the teenager, stating that although they had received hundreds of clues, they still needed that missing piece to bring Sarah home. The agent reminded that there is a $5,000 reward for information that leads to finding Sarah's whereabouts. After the video was published, the young girl's father broke the silence he had maintained for years. He expressed his feelings about how the agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, treated him in the case of his daughter Sarah's disappearance. At the time of his statement, he served as chief of the Roland Police Department and mentioned that despite holding that position, he needed to be treated as a father, as Sarah was still his daughter regardless of the circumstances. It is worth remembering that previously, Hubert had worked as a deputy sheriff of another county when his daughter disappeared, and this somehow led to him being viewed very critically and always being under suspicion. Hurt by the whole situation that kept him always in the public eye, despite there being no real evidence against him, Hubert said that over the years, the FBI had barely contacted him in relation to Sarah, and he recalled a call in which they asked him about his daughter's orthodontics due to the finding of some human remains, which ultimately turned out not to be Sarah's, but no one informed him of the results. He found out like any other citizen when the media published the outcome of the investigation of the female remains found near the train. The truth was, in the investigators' opinion, there was someone close to Sarah who was not revealing all the information they had, and this had given rise to numerous rumors and speculations about what had happened. Hubert expressed his deep concern about not knowing anything about his daughter's whereabouts after she came to live with him and his wife 2 months before disappearing. Despite the difficult situation, he maintained hope that Sarah was alive and stated that no one had provided him with solid evidence to indicate otherwise. He clarified that he was not an indifferent father to what had happened and offered his arguments for keeping a low profile. He said that although he had experience as a detective due to his 23 years in law enforcement, he preferred to stay away from the investigation to avoid any perception of influence or interference in the process. However, that didn't seem to work out quite well either, as he then received criticism for being lenient and not offering cooperation. He pointed out that his position was quite difficult, as whether he did or did not do something generated abundant criticism. To the father's statement, the FBI responded in a very institutional way. Through a public affairs specialist, they responded to Hubert's concerns about routine contact in relation to Sarah's case and explained that they had always spoken with the family when there were updates in the investigation, but they would not necessarily make a personal notification for already known information. Despite the pain and uncertainty, Sarah's father shared that there came a point where he had to surrender to God's will and not let worries dominate his life. He affirmed that ultimately God knew best and would handle the situation according to his will, regardless of what the final outcome was. On June 13, 2023, special agents and officers from Robeson County conducted a search at the Graham family's home looking for new clues about Sarah's disappearance. The sheriff's office stated at that time that they were doubting the version given by the father and stepmother about the day the young girl was last seen. The statement from the sheriff's office indicated that they had not been able to independently confirm the family's version that Sarah left for work the day she disappeared, which occurred more than 8 years ago. Now, after such a long time has passed since her last sighting, Sarah's case is being reviewed again. In a Facebook post, the sheriff's office confirmed that homicide detectives, the FBI, and a tracker dog from the North Carolina Troopers Association had started a search, although no details were provided about the location where it was taking place. According to the authorities, Sarah is one of several Native American women who have mysteriously disappeared in the same area in recent years. During the summer of 2017, it was reported that 3 women, 2 of them belonging to the North Carolina tribe, were found dead in the city of Lumberton in Robeson County. The cases have not been solved, which has raised fears of the existence of a possible serial killer, according to a news report. Despite this concerning situation, the sheriff's office did not mention any possible connection between these cases and Sarah's disappearance in their statement. The case of Sarah Nicole Graham remains a mystery, leaving her family and community seeking answers for over 8 years. Over time, authorities have conducted thorough investigations and searches, but to this date, there has been no significant breakthrough in the case of Sarah Nicole Graham. The lack of concrete information has led to various theories and speculation, while Sarah's family continues to wait anxiously for the day they can find answers about her whereabouts. Despite the efforts of the authorities, the community's cooperation, and the leads received, Sarah's case remains an unsolved puzzle. Her family continues to cry out for justice and longs for the day when the truth about her disappearance is unveiled. Meanwhile, the memory of Sarah endures in the minds of those who knew and loved her, and the hope of finding her alive persists. As the investigation continues, it is hoped that new leads and developments will shed light on this dark and painful episode, bringing the long-awaited peace and closure to her family and the community.